So, Mila, just to confirm, were you able to get in touch with all the applicants? Are we sure that all of them can join and have internet?
Yes, and they actually are all already joined in the waiting room. So anytime we're ready, we can invite them in.
You can invite everyone in. We'll do citizens to be heard, etc., and then we'll start the interviews.
Okay.
All right.
Good.
Okay. Now someone has YouTube on in the background and I can hear the echo. So if you have YouTube on in the background, can you close that window or mute the YouTube video so that there's no echo? Okay. Great. Now, for those of you who are watching on YouTube, there's a bit of a lag. We will be doing citizens to be heard right now. So if you would like to join, the Zoom details are at the top of the agenda, and then we'll do another call for citizens to be heard at 5 o'clock following with the County Council's standard. So is there anybody who is on the call who would like to speak on something that does not relate to one of the items on the agenda, including any of the public hearings? If you're here to speak on a public hearing, you'll have a chance to make a comment then. Do you have any comments to make that are not currently a public hearing on the agenda?
Yeah, I've got a quick comment.
This Go ahead, Reed.
Reed Pendleton. I guess I was looking at the survey that you guys are doing for the 313 area, and I just had two quick questions. So question 1, section A seemed a little bit misleading to me. It says, currently undeveloped private parcels would remain in the range grazing zone. There are parcels that already have zoning above range grazing. So is that more supposed to read all currently undeveloped parcels would keep their current zoning? Or are you guys contemplating down zoning the highway commercial and resort special properties that currently have zoning out there? So that was one clarification I was looking for. The second one was the specific uses. I see just kind of a random selection of uses out of the use table in the code. And along the same lines, I guess I was wondering, because there's a highway commercial property out there that has a huge selection of permitted uses. And so if you're only going to allow people to look at a selective few uses, are you going to downzone the highway commercial permitted uses? I'm just kind of wondering how all that works, because right now the highway commercial property has a plethora of uses. And so if you're going to apply this new plan to that property, do they lose some of those permitted uses, or are we looking at more bringing the rest of the properties up to the highway commercial standard? So I was just looking for some clarification on how all that was decided. That's all.
All right. So generally we wouldn't go into conversation at this point, but Kevin, do you want to just, because I see your hand, just make a quick clarification, and then we'll have this conversation later in the
I'll try to be really quick. I think your first point is a good one, and I think we should probably change the survey to clarify that. So thanks for pointing that out. And I think your interpretation is correct. It just means things stay at their existing zoning. I think we weren't trying to list every possible use. I mean, most of the parcels out there are either resort special or range and grazing. And so we tried to cover those uses plus some others that have been requested recently, but we didn't want to go through every single thing in the highway commercial zone. So that's my quick answer.
All right. Thanks, Kevin. Is there anybody else who would like to make a comment on something that is not being discussed as a public hearing later on today? Okay, so we will just do another call at 5 o'clock, just in case. As far as ex parte communications, we have a few public hearings today. Do any commissioners have any ex parte communications or potential conflicts of interest in order to disclose? All right. So next, approval of meeting minutes from June 22nd. Has everyone had a chance to review the minutes. Jalen, I know that you had made a comment around a spelling correction, and Abby said that she was going to correct that. Do any commissioners want to make a motion?
Sure, I'll move that we approve the minutes.
Second it.
Okay, approved by Bob, seconded by Brian. Any additional comments or discussion? All right, so I'll call for the vote. All in favor of approving the June 22nd minutes, raise your hand or say aye. Yeah, don't have my Brady Bunch view. Garish?
Aye.
All right, passed unanimously. Wonderful. Okay, now we have a seat that is vacant due to Abby joining the planning staff. And we have 4 applicants who have applied to join the Planning Commission. So here's how we're going to run this. I am going to call you in the order that your names appear in the packet. Every single planning commissioner has been asked to come up with 1 question, and we will ask the same question of each of you after you've had a moment to introduce yourselves to us. We have seen your applications, so we do have that information about you. And we may have just a few follow-up questions, but we will do our best to ask consistent questions and to ask those questions consistently of all of the applicants. I see 2 faces. I see Josie and Will, excuse me. And then Steve, and is it Makeda? Did I say that right?
Makeda, sorry, working on
Makeda.
it together.
No, wonderful. So I just want to make sure we have your audio. If you can't be on video, that's fine. But I just want to make sure that we can hear you all before we start in. So.
Can you hear me? This is Will.
Can hear you. Yes, Steve, I see your face now. Sorry, I missed you earlier in my Brady Bunch view. Okay. All right. So Makeda, we will invite you to start. So we don't have a time clock on these, but we will try to just keep everything to about the same time, just for the sake of fairness. But I'll invite you and see if everyone can just please mute yourselves if you're not currently speaking, so we can eliminate background noise. Makeda, I invite you to come off of mute and introduce yourself and a little bit about your background, and then we'll follow up with questions.
Okay, cool. Are those lights in the background going to be weird?
No, you're good.
Okay. I'm Makeda. I have lived in Moab for 3.5 years, and I work at the Mark currently, which is under the city. And I'm involved in a lot of different things in town, primarily the community gardens in Moab, as well as I'm on the YGP board and the Arts Council currently. So that's kind of the little snippet about me. Yeah, and I'm really interested in local politics and giving back to the community and figuring out ways to be like an active participant in how our community is developing. So
Wonderful. Well, it's wonderful to meet you. So like I mentioned, we'll each ask you a question and give you a moment to respond. I'll start with my question, and then I'll popcorn around the order that I see the commissioners. So my question to you is, what do you think are the most prominent planning and development issues currently in Grand County?
Yeah, I would say the most important issues are probably housing security and affordability, fair and appropriate zone, and probably cohesive plan for the future.
Wonderful. Kevin, yours is the face that I see next.
Hey, Kevin.
Okay, well, I didn't realize I was next in line. So a lot of the decisions we have to make in planning and zoning in the county involve sort of balancing, we're sort of between these two extremes, completely unregulated and everyone could do whatever they want, and that would have a set of advantages and disadvantages, or we could regulate things very strictly, and it would be very hard to do anything on a piece of land, and we try to aim for some ideal balance point in the middle typically. So I guess I'm curious your thoughts about the trade-offs between too many rules and too few rules, over regulation and under regulation. You can think of either specific things the city or county has done, or just hypothetical situations, whatever.
Yeah, I think I fall somewhere. This is going to sound like a cop out, but a little bit in the middle. A little bit on the side favoring having kind of some regulation and guidelines for how we're carrying on. I think the city and county recently did with the overlay zone, brought in that firm whose name is escaping me currently. And that was, I specifically was involved with the city specific process a little bit more, but I really appreciated that process and kind of getting public feedback and having it be a longer process where people were able to contribute their opinions and have themselves heard, but also taking all the information and then giving it to people who do this for their profession, things, and are on the planning commission and devote their time to this and educated on it, to kind of take that information and those opinions and come up with a solution that is kind of a compromise. I think something that Moab could potentially do better in the future is, again, like I said, coming up with some kind of cohesive plan for longer than just the current moment. A lot of towns in neighboring areas have kind of done a variety of things in comparison to Moab, from, like you said, completely unregulated and just kind of a free-for-all, to heavily regulated, and they have a super cohesive city plan, and everything's like all matchy and everything. And I think we could do something. We have a really awesome community, a lot of really intelligent, creative people, and people who have a variety of experiences in Moab, from being here for 8 generations to moving here last year. But I think that it'd be cool to have some kind of plan that's community oriented, but is a longer term thing for us. Sorry, long.
You're fine. Sorry to hit you up without you knowing, Kevin. Brian, I'm going to popcorn to you.
Hi. So I kind of have a two-phase question. What is your vision for the community, and do you have time to serve? What is your vision for the community?
Yeah. My vision for the community is some kind of I feel like there's there can be two extremes. It's a spectrum in Moab. There are two extremes. And I think that, like, my personal vision for the community is to compromise what everybody wants from this town, because there's people who want totally unregulated and there's people that don't want totally unregulated, finding some kind of way that everybody gets a little bit of the pie. So something where there's affordable housing for people, like in the service industry, because we need those people. There's recreation opportunities, and there are places for our guests to stay when they visit, and finding a way to make Moab sustainable, and not in like the eco sense, but in the like economic and just living here way, finding a way that people who are living here, people who are going to live here, and people who are visiting here can all be happy with how town is laid out and how town is developing sustainably. And yes, as far as time, I feel like I do have time. I do work full time for the Mark, but I have a pretty flexible schedule, and so I'm able to make up time by working from home and doing things. So I'm able to serve on like the I mentioned before, pretty comfortably.
Thank you.
Thank you. Rachel, I see you next on my screen. Oh, Rachel, you're on mute.
Okay, I had two questions, but I didn't circulate this, so I don't know if somebody has these before. So
Let's ask one and let's everyone get
yeah,
through. Yeah.
sounds good. Okay. Okay, so how do you see your role on the Planning Commission in terms of gaining community feedback, so residents and developers, in guiding development in Grand County?
Sorry, can you repeat that, please?
Yeah, so how do you see your role on the Planning Commission in terms of obtaining community feedback to guide development in Grand County? So that would be, residents and developers and
Sure.
non-residents too.
Sure. Yeah, I don't know. I think I consider myself a pretty social person and a pretty active person in the community, and I have made an effort to be involved in many different, kind of dip my toes into many different circles within our community. And one of the things I value the most is bringing those different groups together. And so I think I don't have much context for working with developers. It's not something I've done in the past. So I would probably look to the senior commission members for help and what mentorship or whatever in contacting these people and working with these people and stuff. But as far as professionally, I've worked with lots of contractors and consultants and stuff. I'm assuming it's somewhat similar. And as far as community groups, I do a lot of organizing and coordinating of events and coordinating of groups and stuff. So I'm really familiar with getting input from a variety of people and vast methods of doing so. So like finding a way that everyone's going to hear about it and everyone's going to be able to get involved and have a say adequately. So I think that's, and I am younger, and so I think that could play to my advantage of being connected to the younger population in Moab and being more familiar with those methods of communication that a lot of the millennials and younger people in Moab use.
Thank you. Bob? Wait, Bob, you're on mute too.
Okay, he's finally unmuted himself. So my question is, what in your background are your most relevant experiences for this position?
Yeah. I've been an art administrator for the extent of my short career so far. So I'm familiar with crowdsourcing ideas, crowdsourcing people's opinions. Community involvement is kind of what my position and my past work experience has been all about. And so I think that experience with working with diverse groups of people and getting kind of a consensus on something, not obviously pertaining to planning, but pertaining to public art or community events or art offerings or any myriad of things. But that would be really helpful. And I additionally have done a lot of work with underserved populations and resource management and finding ways to connect people to things that aren't maybe the truth. So I think that would be my biggest area of expertise pertaining to this position, is just working with groups of people and crowdsourcing and not playing the role of maybe captain, but playing the role of facilitator. So, and not in that like, oh, I don't make decisions, but in more of like coming into it with open ears and wanting to like find solutions that benefit everyone. So that sounds kind of like a I'm realizing that sounds kind of like a fluffy answer, but yeah, I don't have specific experience to planning, but I do have a lot of administrative and organizing with groups. So I've organized with Moab Pride. I was on the organization team for that and did a lot of coordinating of events and coordinating of individuals and a lot of like the legal, running a group like that. I'm in the chair of the Arts Council, so I like do a lot of working with different entities in Moab and Grand County and the surrounding counties. And I work for the city, and so I do a lot of interfacing with the public and talking to people and making decisions that can be tumultuous, but trying to do it in the best way for our community.
Great.
Sure.
Garish? Garish, do you want to take the last question? You're muted as well. We're 3 for 3.
Give that a try. Okay. My question is similar to Kevin's, I think, but in making land management decisions, there often is a tension between public interest and property rights, rules, regulations, policies, codes, that sort of thing, and private property rights. And often people come to the Planning Commission and are disappointed because they don't get what they want. Sometimes they'll go on to we'll make a recommendation that they don't like, and then they'll go on to the county council, and the council will make a decision on the merits as they see the proposal. So how do you see, how would you see kind of dealing with this tension between private property rights and the public interest? You know, if you're weighing public benefit but compared to a private benefit, how would you kind of work through your mind to come to a conclusion as to how you feel about something?
Yeah. I don't know if there's obviously not an easy answer for this, but I think it probably would begin with looking at, weighing what is going to have the biggest impact in a positive way, and what is legally, obviously that's a huge concern, is legally, like what are we allowed to do, and then also maintaining that private property rights are important. But when it comes down to, one person's private property rights versus, a community of 5,000 people's well-being or livelihood or whatever, I think this is a really subjective situation that you're, I know this is obviously, there's always a different scenario, but it's hard to know without having a specific scenario in mind. But I tend to lean in the direction of considering the community's well-being while using, tried information. So information and facts that are presented with the situation, right? So if somebody comes with something, doing the research, understanding nuances of what they're wanting to do or what we're wanting to do and how that's going to affect the private property owner, but also understanding how that's going to affect the community, and understanding that ultimately 5,000 people versus one person is kind of a weird call to make. And so I think my biggest priority is community well-being and community happiness. And I think it really depends on the impact of this person. If a private landowner, what they were trying to do and what we were trying to do as affecting them, depending on if they were coming to us with a project or if we were coming to them saying, hey, we're going to rezone X, Y, or Z. But
Great.
does that answer very clearly, or is that kind of garbled?
That was a
Yeah.
great response. Thank you. And thank you for going first. I know it's always difficult being the first
Sure.
up at that. So appreciate your time. So we are going to repeat this for each of the 4 candidates or applicants. Commissioners, I think now that we've all answered our questions, let's see if we can sort of tighten up the request just for the sake of time, since it's 4:30. And
Sorry.
no, you're fine. And it was wonderful to meet you. And we're going to go through these and then we will vote. So you're welcome to stay on, or you're welcome to drop and rejoin.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So next up is Steve Evers. So Steve, I'll give you an opportunity to introduce yourself, and then same run. We're going to go through and let each of us ask you the same questions.
Perfect. So I'm Steve Evers. I moved to Moab first in 2011. That was in a seasonal capacity. I was in the education and guiding world. Then I've been full-time since I think 2013, maybe 2014. The years are blurring together now. I'm a bit of a jack of all trades, kind of a lot of irons in several fires, as a lot of us Moabites do. Currently, I'm working construction, trying to start my own company, and probably the most trying of circumstances for a multi-day adventure company. And also kind of turning into a bit of an amateur developer. My wife and I were able to purchase land within the last 2 years, and we just built our house, and we've got some additional acreage. So I have gone through the HDHO the overlay process for that high density housing. So I have some familiarity with how that is integrated into the commission here, and what that process looks like. And I guess I don't want to ramble on too long, so we've got some tight time. So I'll just stop there and field some questions.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for joining us this evening. I'll start with my question and then we'll go in the same order. So my question is, what do you think are the most prominent planning and development issues facing Grand County today?
So I think 2 things. First would be economic diversification. I think the work that we've done in the past couple of years has really set us up well for better housing. So that I would put that as number 2 behind economic development and diversification, as we're seeing really, with COVID. But we've got 600 more houses or units in the pipeline. So hopefully that'll stem kind of the immediate crises that I see going on right now with housing. But down the line, we really need to be looking at diversification.
Thank you. Kevin.
Okay, so try to do a better job with the question this time. A lot of the decisions we make on the Planning Commission, and actually on the Planning Commission, of course, we don't make any decisions. We just make recommendations to the County Council. But in any case, often one's making trade-offs between the benefits of letting people do what they want to do on their property and the benefits of sort of community values and not letting people be adversely affected by what their neighbors are doing. Can you think of either general principles or specific examples from this community or others where things have gone too far one way or the other? Just to give an idea of where you fall on those sorts of issues.
Yeah, and without looking at a specific example, I'll just say that I tend to be a little bit more utilitarian in that what's going to be the greatest good for the greatest number of people. Obviously, you've got use by right for private landowners, and so how do you tiptoe around that? That's kind of a bit of a dance. And what I can say is what I don't want to see is us become another Aspen or a Telluride. And what I love is the steps we've made over the last 5 years in calling in those community developers and getting their input, so we don't become that. And sorry if I'm getting sidetracked there. In short, it depends, and I think I outlined my general stance on that.
Thank you. Brian. Wait, got it right the first time. There we go.
So So, Steve, what is your vision for the community of Moab?
For everyone to be happy. It's dialogue. We're really a melting pot of vastly different ideologies. I think it needs just dialogue needs to continue. Are we going to always please everybody? Probably not, as the past tends to show humanity. But let's aim for it. And yeah, I've done a little bit of volunteer work with Grant County Hospice, and I've already mentioned that I've been in the guiding world, and I'm in construction, and even my wife owns an architectural firm here, and so I get developers as well. So I feel like I get a good smattering and a good representation of pretty widespread thought and people here, and so I think it's just bringing those voices together and just, maybe it's not going to be ideal for everybody, whatever, however we develop, but at least if voices are heard and if something is really, a bad deal for, a given group of people, let's know about that. So that way we can, try to sidestep that.
And I'll sneak in, since we did ask it of Makeda as well. Do you have time to serve, or do you have any concerns about the amount of work that it takes to be on the commission?
So I want to ask you all, how much work do you do aside from, I know these meetings can be, fairly long, like 4 hours or so, maybe 5 hours at a time, twice a month. What is the back end work? I know I've heard Garish say before when I know he drove out and saw, our property when we were applying for it. How many hours, maybe a couple of you could answer that, like how many extra hours per week would you put in?
I normally put at least 2 to 3 hours to the packet, reviewing areas of the code that's relevant to it. When we have very, very big agendas, that sometimes can go much longer, especially if we have a lot of in-depth material to review for accuracy to conversation and accuracy to intent. There's, depending on the issues that we are working on, field trips, certainly community engagement. So it depends on the month, but it is definitely a part-time job. Anyone else want to weigh in? Maybe Bob, you and Garish have been on for quite some time. Maybe one of you could
Well,
speak.
there's also workshops occasionally, joint meetings with the county council, those kinds of meetings you have with advisors when we were going through HDHO. And citizens. It's hard to estimate the time. Is it 12, 14 hours a month, maybe, to do a reasonable job, I think.
That's a fair estimate.
Great. Well, appreciate that input there. Yeah, I do. Last year, I think it was a good example. Working full-time, then come home and build my house as another full-time job and doing classes on top of it. This year, the house is done, so I'm just working. So yeah, I feel good about that. A lot easier this year.
Rachel.
There we go. Okay. Okay, so what do you see as your role in gathering feedback for guiding development in Grand County? So residents, developers, and non-residents.
So I think I kind of touched on this a little bit with one of my previous answers, in that I'm kind of tied in a lot of different areas. I would say it's pretty diverse network for me here locally. And so just in picking up and asking questions and really hearing people out and what they're saying and kind of identifying what the needs are, I would say that's what I have done. Just kind of always been interested in people's perspectives and, what their wants are, and just, their side of things. So I think that's a good question that I don't really, aside from doing that, I haven't thought what I would do. That would be something that I would certainly take input from you all that have been serving for a while, and what you all do and what are some good tactics. But I can honestly say that's not something that I have thought about before the fact. And so open to learning new ways in which to do that, aside from kind of what I already do, being plugged in the way I am.
Wonderful. Bob?
Yeah, I'm going to revise my answer of 10 to 12 hours. I was forgetting the meetings in that part, which seemed to take 3 hours. So that gives you 6, and then you have the review of the packet. And I was probably thinking workshops and meeting with the county council. And, you know, those things don't happen all the time, but they might add on average, because sometimes it'll be 10 hours, sometimes nothing, but they might add another 5 hours. So I don't know, maybe 15 hours a week. That's just to discourage you. So here's the question.
I'm still here.
What in your background are probably the most relevant experiences for this position?
I think 2 things, kind of my jack of all trades nature. I think that is almost a bit of a metaphor for how I'm plugged into all these different industries. And so that connection that you get with people and you know, what are their pain points, you know, with how things have been developed is certainly part of it. And then also having been in the tourism industry for 12 to 15 years, I've traveled internationally and worked internationally throughout the U.S. So I have done work in the Roaring Fork Valley. So that's all of the, you know, the whole Aspen Strip, and seen how that's developed. I went to school in Gunnison and have seen how Crested Butte, you know, 20 minutes up the road, how they've done things. And then, you know, internationally speaking as well. So it's more so personal experience. However, I have managed an outdoor education school, and, you know, so I've had a staff team of 75 people. And so that interaction with people and, you know, how do you get, you know, a team in kind of the same direction, moving in the same direction. You know, I have that experience as well in managing projects.
Right. And Garish?
Okay, Steve, good to see you. My question is, can you talk about how, as a commissioner, you would deal with sorting out personal property rights from the public property rights which exist, and then private property rights, personal property rights, and overall well-being of the community? I mean, there's this tension that comes before us often, where we have neighbors who are for or against a proposal, and we have developers or landowners that want to do something with their property, either for economic gain or just because they can or want to. And, you know, in your mind, how do you sort out that, you know, how as a commissioner would you make decisions knowing that tension can exist?
Yeah, good question. You know, a lot of it would just be relying on public input. What during those comment periods, what are people saying, and what are the merits and the weights, you know, assigned to each of those comments, and kind of the number of comments. You know, is it an overwhelming opposition and just a couple for, and, you know, looking at that, you know, and that's just a piece of the puzzle, really. And I understand too, you know, a lot of times there's not very many public comments, and so what do you do there? And I think it's, you know, relying on my own understanding of the world, really, and development and how that works, and to decide, okay, is this going to be for the betterment of the most people, or is this just a get rich quick and leave, and, you know, let the residents deal with the consequences. Looking at that, and at the end of the day, as I understand it too, I mean, we're just, it's a recommendation for a lot of things, and then the council, so legally, even if I wanted to say, I was an anti-development everything and say no, I don't recommend that, it's onto the county. So, at a point, there are going to be certain personal politics, which I try to push to the side, and like I said, have that utilitarian view. But none of us are impervious to our own bias, and so yeah, I'll just stop there. I could philosophize for the rest of the evening, but we won't.
Well, thank you, Steve, for joining us. And again, you're welcome to stay on. And when we vote at the end of this, if you do drop, you can rejoin then. So
Great.
appreciate it.
Thanks for your time.
Thank you. Josie. So we'd love to give you a chance to introduce yourself, and then we'll go through the questions again.
Sure. So Josie Kovash, I've lived in Moab since 2005, so about 15 years. I grew up in Telluride, so I'm kind of the Colorado Plateau region, and also sort of a lifer in terms of living in resort communities. I've had a kind of a running the gamut of professional experience in Moab, mostly tending towards like the nonprofit sector in town. So stints with YGP and KZMU, Outward Bound. I've interacted with both Makeda and Steve in a lot of communities in town. And currently I'm also on the board of the Resiliency Hub, which is the umbrella for MOCOM, Moab Community Gardens. So that board focused on sort of resiliency in Moab in whatever ways that applies. And recently built a house for my family, which is my husband and my 2-month-old daughter. We live on Locust Lane next door to the mayor. So I also get to hear her take on a lot of things. And yeah, that's sort of it in a nutshell. Similar to Makeda, I volunteer with a lot of different things. So Moab Pride, Moab Community Theater, there's just like almost everything in town that at some point I've dipped my toes in pretty substantially.
Wonderful. Well, it's wonderful to meet you. Thank you for joining us. What do you think are the most prominent planning and development issues facing Grand County?
Yeah, so again, echoing things that Steve and Makeda have both touched on, sort of philosophically, definitely affordable housing, I think, is always in the foreseeable future going to be something that Grand County needs to have at the forefront. Economic diversity and sort of diversifying the community away from industrial tourism in any ways that we can. I think that continues to be really important. And then sort of to kind of specific things, I see obviously the development of the North Corridor and the shaping of that vision, as well as like the continued shaping of the South Commercial Corridor. Those are obviously things that I feel like are going to be pretty forefront in terms of sort of the where that those philosophies occur.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Kevin?
So a lot of the decisions the county council makes on planning and zoning have to do with balancing the benefits of letting people do what they want to do without too many restrictions, and community benefits of not having irrational scattershot development that has adverse effects on neighbors. Can you think of either say something either general or with specific examples from our community about what you feel about that issue?
Sure. And this is, I feel like my answer is a little bit like it depends. I think in general, when dealing with large scale development, it seems really good to have a lot of rules and regulations in place to, curb things that are excessive or against the vision of the community. Because kind of once things get developed, it's sort of harder to rein them in or undo them. However, like on the smaller scale, I can see where certain rules and regulations might disincentivize things that I perceive as in the public good. And that would be things that are more towards like green building and permacultural concepts. I've also definitely received input from people who would like build an ADU in their backyard for additional affordable housing, but don't feel like there's a lot of economic incentive to do so. So thinking about ways in which regulation might be curbing those incentives for locals to be, say, creating affordable housing. So again, that answer is kind of like, it depends. And I think just being really smart about what policies and visions are shaped and having some consistency around that, and like revisioning on a regular basis and reviewing things which are in place that maybe aren't working. Yeah.
Thank you. Brian.
In light of the needs of native species and habitats and ecosystems.
We got something in the background.
And what does it
Very
mean
good.
to actually have
So what is your vision for the
actually have
Moab community as a whole?
about,
Do you have time
lands
to serve?
that they have had
Yes.
activities in for
Does,
thousands
I
of
feel like
years?
someone may need to
Also,
mute
what is
Yeah,
there.
Brian, why don't you mute now? I think,
influence?
yeah, there you go. Thank you.
So you're
Okay.
So what is your
Um,
vision for the community, and do you have
yes.
time to serve, was Brian's question.
Yeah, I mean, my vision, and I think this is in my application, is largely putting the community first in everything, in planning in the community, and that does feel a bit nebulous because, as Steve said, there are diverse interests in the community, and that may not mean one thing. For me personally, it does mean sustainability, both in an economic and tourist way, but also in a very clear environmental way. It means quality of life for residents. I definitely chose to live in Moab because I felt like I could have a better quality of life here without having to make a lot of money in order to do so. Coming from the Bay Area, that's not possible there. And here it has been possible, but that's not guaranteed. So I think also continuing to make sure that people have access to jobs which are fulfilling to them, to property ownership if they want, to being able to contribute to the community without having to, work 60 hours a week or just be generally stressed out. And so again, with the economic diversification, and I think something that Moab has not been terrific at, which I do see in other similar communities, is just really having kind of an aesthetic vision of, how we want the town to feel. Is it bikeable? Is it walkable? Do we have businesses where it's nice to sit outside without hearing semi trucks all the time? I think it's really important to kind of really get into that visceral feeling of how do we want the day to day to feel. I hear ATVs 24/7 from my porch. I don't like that. I think a lot of people don't like that. That's not really in the Planning Commission's purview necessarily, but I think thinking on terms of those levels of like, what is the community's day-to-day experience and what policies will help shape that. Oh, and time. Time, similar to Steve, I have my toes in a lot of different pools. I tend to volunteer and overcommit. I play music in town. That can be anywhere from 1 to 3 nights a week when things are in a more normal situation where we have live music. I am currently not employed full-time because I left the radio station in order to have my child. So that is the other piece of it, is that I do have a 2-month-old, and that's sort of like a nebulous time commitment because it's, like I was reading the agendas from the last 2 meetings and it just might be interrupted from time to time by things. But in general, I sign up for things in Moab when it is interesting to me, when I feel like I will learn from it. And when I think that I can provide something with it as well. And so really for me, I'm always able to make time for those things.
Wonderful. Thank you. Rachel.
All right. So how do you see your role in gathering community feedback? So residents, developers, and non-residents in guiding the development of Grand County.
Yeah, echoing again, a lot of things that have already been said. I don't necessarily per se have a lot of direct lines to developers. It's not quite the circle that I run in, but I imagine there's a lot of obvious conduits that the commission and the county sort of are already engaged in. Residents, I think it is really important to increase engagement. And, you know, I myself have maybe not been as engaged in the past unless it was something that was directly affecting me, because when you are working full time or, you know, sort of engaged in a lot of other aspects of community, you don't always have time or the onus to go to meetings and get involved on that kind of political local government level. So I think I have a mind for people that don't prioritize that engagement and trying to get more of that engagement, really reaching out to populations that don't normally show up to meetings and really compelling them with what their engagement will do as far as shaping how the community goes moving forward. Because I think a lot of those folks that aren't engaged still do have a lot of stake in what happens in this community and the way it develops, and would really care to be engaged if they knew that it was going to have a positive effect. And my role for that definitely piggybacks on the fact that I've worked with a lot of different organizations that interact with a lot of different cross sections of the community. So I feel like in the time that I've lived here, I do know a lot of the different pockets and subcultures of this community. And I've also worked in the service industry quite a bit, which, you know, like I worked at the bookstore for 2 years and you learn everybody's names because of the frequent buyer program. So I've definitely interacted face to face with a lot of people in town and kind of know how to reach those hidden pockets of people. And then the final thing I would say is just obvious partnerships, especially nonprofits that are directly serving entire subpopulations of the community. And that could be anywhere from, you know, like service nonprofits in town, like the Multicultural Center, obviously the Travel Council and other entities that are more connected with visitors, and with the businesses in town that are primarily here for visitors. Those are the obvious avenues for that kind of outreach. So.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
What in your background are probably the most relevant experiences for this position?
Yeah, so similar to what I was saying about outreach and getting community feedback, you know, I've worked for the Youth Garden Project, for KZMU, for the bookstore. I've worked at several restaurants in town. I've definitely off and on been like the public face of an organization. And so I'm used to people sort of identifying me with, you know, sort of some efforts going on in town, be that around growing locally or around public media, things like that, the Resiliency Hub. So I think that kind of experience with dealing face to face with a lot of the community, and also with all the volunteer work that I've talked about. And then definitely building my own house and, you know, navigating that as a first-time homeowner, home builder, in terms of Grand County codes and procedures, and also just the experience of going through the process of trying to establish for myself affordable housing that I can be an owner of, being someone who typically makes barely over the poverty line. Just that very direct experience of being someone who often is a wage, you know, earner in town, that is living paycheck to paycheck, that does not have a lot of savings or a lot of personal wealth, and that, yeah, echoes the experience of a lot of people in town who are underserved, but really need to be served by policies around affordable housing and economic diversity. Yeah, I would say that sums that up.
Thank you. Garish?
Josie, there is a tension that naturally comes when regulation is being applied to private property, and it's difficult sometimes to sort out what people's private property rights should allow versus what the public should allow for someone to use their property. So in your mind, how difficult will it be for you to kind of sort out property rights and allowable uses, when there is public sentiment against a proposal? And there are also are public property rights that are sometimes involved in things like roads, trails, easements across properties. And so in your mind, how do you sort that out, this tension, and how can you make a good decision about making a recommendation to the county council when there is this conflict between these different rights and interests?
Yeah, and my answer definitely is similar to some of the things that Steve spoke about. I think that personally and philosophically, my inclination is always to put the public good before private property rights, is always to put the local community before investors from out of town. That's definitely where my personal philosophy is. I know that the ideal is to be able to find the medium between that philosophy and giving property owners the basic rights of knowing when they bought a property, what they're allowed to do, and not having those things taken away from them. I would say that I feel like Utah generally is very good at being for property owners. And so I'm not totally worried about making that decision myself. I would, as a commissioner, rely on, county staff, on the county attorney to kind of say, this is the confines around how much we can put the public good above property rights at this juncture. So that's what I would be leaning on to kind of curb my sense of always going towards the common good. And just as Steve said, with the public good, knowing what that actually is, which does require really good information gathering, really good engagement of public input, so that there is a really good sense of what the most people in town actually want in various applications, so that there's a really good understanding of who we're serving when we are serving like the greater public good.
Thank you, Josie. Wonderful to meet you. All right, Will, just as I thanked Makeda for being first, I have to thank you for taking the caboose, and appreciate your patience. So we'll go through the same process. I'll give you a chance to introduce yourself.
Sure. I think many of you know me because we just visited a few weeks ago, it seems. My name is Will Hansen. I'm married to a lifer here in Moab. My wife grew up here, and she was part of the original settlers. And this is our third stint here in Moab. We were here 20 years ago, and then 15 years ago, and now we're back. And it's been interesting to observe the changes in the last years, more so the last 10 years probably. But by profession, I'm a mental health counselor, and so that has lent to my desire to be an influence for what I see as the challenges that Moab faces, and the fear of the future that people have in Moab. So that's part of why I want to do this. I want to get involved in that.
Wonderful. Well, it's wonderful to meet you. So my question to you, we've heard 3 times now, is what do you think are the most prominent planning and development issues facing Grand County today?
I think that there's 2 things that are in play. One is that we do have to, I think, grab hold of the vision of what we're going to see. Moab's I'm a pilot. And one of the things I learned early on is that once you take off, you have to land. Okay. And Moab has taken off, and we have to figure out how to land Moab in a good way where we don't crash. And part of that is really tied to the vision of what Moab's going to be. we want to be able to manage the growth that's going to happen. It's not going to stop. The box is open. We can't, as I've said before to this council, I believe, you can't undo Facebook. You can't undo all the advertising that's out there in social media about what Moab is. And people love Moab, and there's a reason, but we have to preserve Moab. The Moab that I knew 20 years ago can still be here, but we have to have a vision of what it's going to look like when the growth happens. And so I think that that's the biggest challenge is that vision, and then bringing people into compliance. I think I read this off of, I read a note on Zacharias Levine's wall from a man from Colorado who somewhat disparaged our town because of the inconsistencies in terms of buildings, presentation, zonings that he had observed. And I think that we've got to bring people into the vision. And if we do it heavy-handedly, it will be a constant fight, and we will never accomplish that. But if you can draw a lot more bees with honey than you can in any other way. And that's what we have to do. We have to let people catch that vision and then see how compliance with code and with the zoning will benefit them both long-term and short-term.
Great, thank you. Brian.
Isn't it my turn?
Sorry, Kevin, yes, I was thinking to key Brian up for his question. Didn't mean to. Kevin, sorry, thank you.
No problem. So a lot of the decisions that come before us have to do with balancing benefits of letting people do what they want to do without unnecessary burdensome regulations from the government, and people just wanting to preserve a community that's not, having some small number of developments lower the quality of life for a large majority of people. What can you say about what you feel about those issues, either with specific examples or just general principles?
Well, I think that Moab's a case study in that. I mean, it's the epitome of the dichotomies that exist right now in so much of our society. But I think that one of the things that we have to consider is that we know from statistically speaking that the majority of people, I don't know if you can see that, but if we look at the bell curve, the classic bell curve, so often people want to, they want to be 2 and 3 standard deviations off of center. And we have to, and that's again, part of the education is that we have to have a vision so that people see that they don't have to polarize themselves, and that a compromising place off the mean, not too far, but in that mean, if they'll get closer to that, they can benefit personally, and Moab benefits collectively. But if we polarize that conversation, we lose both sides. So I think that's the idea is bring them in, have the dialogue, alleviate fear. Fear is rampant in Moab, and we have to not be afraid to have those conversations, both publicly and privately with individuals. So.
Brian.
My turn now.
Yes, sorry.
So Will, what is your vision of Moab, and will you have time to serve?
Yeah, the time to serve is not an issue. My vision for Moab is that it's a lot like creating somewhat of a reserve. We have our reserve in town. We build reserves so that it protects the sanctity, if you will. We call it a sanctuary, right? We protect the sanctity of something that we love. And so the vision is that we have to use our influence to the council in one, adhering to the code, but the vision has to be that we protect the residential. We've had some people talk about the residential experience and how it's been changed. We need to get back to protecting that experience for our residents. In doing so, we can't just negate the idea that Moab is going to continue to grow. So we have to see where the growth is going to happen. We have to do it in an economically and an environmentally responsibly way. We have to encourage people to utilize technology to minimize our impact, our footprint. That has to be there. Otherwise, we will be, again, out of control. And then there will be the back and forth that we are getting right now. So the vision for me is that we can have everybody here. Everybody can have what they want in Moab if they'll compromise. But if we polarize, that's where we're gonna have an issue. We can have the commercial. We have the corridors. They're established. Let's use them appropriately. We have the residential. I think in some ways we need to get a lot of the overnight stuff out of the residential. I think it's crippling the Moab experience for people. That's a tough sell. That's a tough sell, but I think that's part of the experience.
Thank you. Rachel?
Yeah, how do you see your role in gathering community feedback? So residents, developers, and then also non-residents in guiding development in Grand County?
We have to be approachable. If we go into this, regardless of where we sit on what Moab should and should not be, we have to be approachable to have the dialogue. And so if there's somebody who wants to shrink Moab back to 1975, when their houses were 12,000 for a 1,500 square foot house, and when there were 5,000 residents in the town, I have to be able to sit down and have that conversation with that person and talk about why they want that and let them have a voice. An individual only finds peace in their life if they have respect, equality, dignity, and democracy, which is the voice. And if we don't allow people to have a voice because of our own agendas, we have failed them as public servants, in my opinion. So that's my role, is to act truly as a servant of the public, not the catalyst for a specific agenda.
Bob?
Yes. What in your background are probably your most relevant experiences for this position?
So before moving here 3 years ago, I had started a business, a mental health practice in Idaho. And one of the things you learn pretty quick, and maybe some of you have known, I don't know your backgrounds, but if you've been in business, you understand profit loss. You understand the value of cash. You understand the flow of money. You better learn that quick or you will go bankrupt. We have to, and so you learn the value of things you also learn the value of things that are not cash-based. I think that's the thing that I can bring to this, is that from the business standpoint, what are the cost of things? Sometimes I think we have this vision, and I've shared, I think, this and that and the other. Sometimes we can have the vision, but if we don't look at the entire picture, the cost of what we're asking, the impact, if we can look at the peripheral impacts of that, we'll be much more sound. We have to be able to look at the ripple effect of what that decision makes long term. And you have to do that in business. And we were successful. We had a good experience. We helped a lot of people. We worked with a lot of people, and it was a wonderful experience. And I do it here on occasion, and so it's the business aspect, I think, that will benefit greatly.
Wonderful. And Garish?
Okay, well,
I know the question, Garish. You want me to just answer?
I think you got the question kind of down. Yeah, go for it.
I got it, man. You know what? I think the tension, we need to not see it as this scary thing. I think it's part of the beauty of what makes us a better people individually and collectively. We have to not be afraid. We have to let that tension be part of the process and educate people on that. And again, not be afraid to sit down knee to knee to a person that you either agree with or that you don't agree with, but sit down with them and say, look, we need this tension. If we just came in and opened Moab up to every developer with, just bam, 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 let them go, we wouldn't like the community. If we let people shut down tourism, shut down growth, we wouldn't like the community. So the tension is critical. There's tension in nature, there's tension everywhere. And we need to embrace it and see it as a powerful mechanism for driving Moab in a productive way.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Will. And thank you to all of our applicants. Every single person who sits on the commission has applied themselves, and it's difficult, it's challenging, and it takes a lot of vulnerability. And I think we're very fortunate as a community to have so many qualified people who'd apply to serve on our various boards. We will be sending our recommendation to the County Council, and here's how we're going to run the vote. I know that there are 4 different applicants for one position. Following our bylaws, each commissioner is going to have 1 vote. I'm going to read out the applicants' names in the order that they appear in the packet and ask you to vote for the person that you think is the person we should be making a recommendation for. And just to place this ahead of time, if on our first vote, 1 person gets 4 votes, we will send them as our recommendation. If we have a 3-person and 1-1-1 split, we will send the person with 3 votes. And if it's 2-2-2, 3-1, yes, 3-1-1, excuse me. No, I guess we wouldn't have that. We have 4. I'm sorry. Ignore me. If somebody gets an outright majority, we will send them. Otherwise, we are going to have a second vote on the top 2 vote getters, and we are going to use that as a tiebreaker. Kevin, check me. Did I get that correct from our back and forth in email? 4 votes.
The last thing you said in email was, 4 votes, then it's over. 3-1-1, we just send the name with 3. Anything else, we take the top 2 vote getters.
Okay.
Assuming, there's not some kind of 3-way tie.
And we'll do 1 more vote, and then we will just pass those results on to the County Council. So just to make that clear, so that if there's any confusion after the fact, we're all clear. Doing this remotely is also its own unique challenge. Again, just want to take a moment to thank all of our applicants. There are always opportunities to serve on additional boards in the county, and if you are not passed forward as a recommended nominee, I highly recommend and implore you to apply in the future for the Planning Commission or for a different board. Kevin.
I just wanted to echo what Emily said. I think, all 4 of you are plausible candidates, but we can only vote for 1. And I know both Emily and I had to apply multiple times before we got the nod to be on the Planning Commission. Best commission in Grant County. So,
I'll third that too. I think all 4 of you sound great, and my term will be coming up this winter as well. So just reapply if you don't get it.
All right. Thank you, everyone. So I will read the list of the applicants. Ask you does everyone have their video on? Yes. Perfect. Okay. So Makeda Barkley. Bob. Steve Evers. Okay. Josie Kovash, sorry. Josie. Okay. Rachel and Kevin, and Will Hansen is Brian and Garish. Okay. So we will do a second vote between Josie and Will. So Josie first, those who would nominate Josie. 3. Rachel, you're on, your video's off. So I need you to raise your hand or not. For Josie, okay. And for Will? Woody, Garish, and Brian. Okay. So thank you, everybody. It's always a very difficult decision between such qualified applicants. We have our recommendation for the County Council. For those of you who have just joined, we are running about 20 minutes behind the agenda. We will be having our public hearings in a moment, but first, if you have joined and you would like to make a citizen comment on an item that is not a public hearing on the agenda, you're welcome to do so now. We do it at 4 o'clock and also at 5. So if you have a comment that is not related to the public hearings, if you could come off of mute, say your full name, and we'll invite your comments into the record. Garish, do you have a citizen comment?
I was just going to say, typically it's for any item that is not on the agenda, not just public hearing items. So if they want to speak about something that is on the agenda, if they would wait, it would speed things up.
So I actually watched a county council hearing, and my takeaway was that Mary called for comments that don't have to do with public hearings, since we don't have a comment period associated with a discussion item. So we can get some clarification there. If you find that you have a comment and it doesn't get addressed during a discussion item, we can approach that today and then figure out a standard moving forward. But thank you, Garish, yes. Okay, with that, I'm going to move us on. So we have 2 public hearings today. There were 3 on the first agenda that went out, the second of which has been postponed. So our first public hearing is the Desert Mesa HDHO subdivision lot 2 amended application. And I know Mila was having some connectivity issues. Are you able to make, or Abby, will you be doing the staff report today?
Mila is planning to do this one. I'm
here.
Yeah,
oh,
I'll let Mila go ahead. I did receive an email public comment after the meeting had started, and I would read that into the record, but I apologize, I'm out of order. I'll let Mila go first.
No, you're fine, but thank you. After we get through the staff report and the applicant statement, we will have an opportunity for citizen comment, at which point, Abby, I think it'd be wonderful if you would read that into the record. Thank you.
Okay, I'll
the public comment. We actually have more than one. Here, let's see. Can you all hear me? Sorry, my internet is being a little bit funny.
We can hear you fine. If you would prefer that we table this and pick it up after the Namaste Rock rezone, would that make more sense for you, or do you want to go forward now?
Can you guys not hear me? Oh my goodness. Okay. Let me.
We can hear you fine right now.
Okay, I'm going to switch back to my phone internet and.
Okay. Does the commissioner want to make a motion to table the first public hearing, and then we can make a second motion to pick it up from the table after the Namaste Rock rezone and give Mila an opportunity to.
Okay, I might be back. Am I back?
We can hear you fine.
Okay, so I just switched to my phone internet. I don't know what's going on.
That's
Maybe
right.
It was the storm earlier. Okay, so I think this should hopefully be stable. So crazy that our cell phones are better than the internet. Okay, so this is the Desert Division 5 application. Glenn is the.
Hey, Mila, I'm sorry. I'm going to speak of you. You're really garbled.
Sure.
You're really garbled.
Really? Okay.
Yep.
Okay, how's that? Is this better?
That's better. Yes.
Okay. Okay, so high density housing overlay application. Glenn Lent is the developer on this property. He has the Sundance HDHO application that you've seen before. So this property is actually right across from the Desert Storm high density housing overlay project that was approved a few weeks ago, if you'll recall. This lot is on the corner of Desert and Mesa Roads. It's 0.6 acres, and they have a base zoning of large lot residential, which is 1 unit per 0.5 acres. He's applying for the HDHO 5 to turn it into 3 lots. That means each lot is 0.2 acres, which is consistent with the density that would be allowed by the HDHO 5. The application has gone through DRT. There are a couple outstanding issues, one of which is just dedicating the right-of-way along Mesa Road, which the applicant has agreed to do. And then the other thing is the lot line adjustment to fix the boundary discrepancy that you'll see in the back. So that's between, this is Desert Mesa subdivision lot 2, and or I think it's Desert, that might be it. Yeah, and then Desert Mesa subdivision lot 3, there's currently a fence encroaching onto this property. And the developer has agreed to allow that fence to become the current boundary line. So there's no dispute, and there will be a lot line adjustment to just deed that property over to the lot 3. Other than that, staff's gone through the application and there are no outstanding issues. We believe that the legislative intent of the high density housing overlay is met by this project, and we would welcome any questions. And I'm sorry I can't share my screen, but hopefully everybody has the proposal in front of you. Oh, one more thing, we do have a preliminary plat application in at the same time. So similar to previous high density housing overlay applications, you can, if you would like to, approve the preliminary plat in this same meeting.
Thank you. If anyone needs to see anything, I can share my screen in the packet. Garish, I see your hand.
So Mila, if the back boundary line of lot 2 is going to be adjusted to this fence, it looks to me like these 3 lots would be less than the 0.2 acres and would not be allowed within the underlying zone. So how does staff reconcile that?
We believe that there's not too much property that would be deeded over, and we believe that in the good faith efforts of the developer to adjust that boundary line, that would would accommodate. The only other option would be to have that person move their fence.
All right, any other questions for staff?
I have a question. This
Jalen?
is Jalen. I did notice that it said that this is a 0.6 acre lot and the applicant is dedicating in the motion, it looks like 66 feet, but on page 10, it refers to 33 feet to get 66 feet total. So that's one question. Should that read 33 feet in the motion? And my second question is, once they dedicate that 33 feet, was the 0.6 acre lot prior to the dedication of that 33 feet? In other words, will there then be less than 0.6 acres? Just wondering how it all works.
So the motion should definitely say 33 feet. Yes, that would be the total width is 66. Thank you for catching that. And then I'm so sorry, but I could not understand your second question. Can you repeat that one?
Yeah, yes, I can. So it's a 0.6 acre lot. Was that 0.6 acres prior to the dedication of the 33-foot right-of-way?
Yes, it is. But the right-of-way dedication doesn't count towards their acreage because that's something that the county needs.
So if I understand correctly, then Mila, there's lots of places in the zoning code where we have minimum acreages and things like that. And you're saying in a situation where a lot is dedicating, so part of it's being dedicated for road right of way, that doesn't hurt the developer in terms of the maximum number of lots they can build. That's just, is that the general policy?
Right, yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Any other questions for staff? All right, so the applicant, whoops, sorry, the applicant Glenn, I see that you are here. Do you want to come off of mute, introduce yourself, and we'll invite you to speak a little bit about your project, the intent, and you're also welcome to address any questions that just were raised to staff. I see that Glenn is on. Glenn, are you able to come off of mute?
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yes, now we can.
Okay. Not really much to share. I mean, a pretty simple little 3-lot split. We thought the right thing to do is try to work out the boundary line agreement with the neighbor behind us. Other than that, if you have any questions for me, I'm happy to answer them.
Are there any questions for the applicant? Okay, thank you, Glenn. So with that, I will open up the public hearing. Now, the way we've done this in the past is if you'd like to make a comment, could you please put into the chat your full name and just say, you know, I want to speak or something to that effect, and then we'll call you in the order that it shows in the chat. If you're not able to chat, I will call for those comments after the fact. This way we can just sort of balance the just doing this remotely. And Abby or Mila, would one of you, there's Abby, would one of you please start by reading those comments into the record?
Yes, so this is an email that I received about 4 o'clock this afternoon, and I'm just gonna read it verbatim. So, to County Planning, residents of Desert Mesa / Mesa Road area request that you do not allow higher density housing in this neighborhood. One, most, if not all of us bought here to avoid this sort of thing and the noise that it would bring to this quiet neighborhood. We have already seen multi-unit housing go up behind the neighborhood. Additional density would make it that much worse for the families that live here. 2, due to the layout of the roads and homes, the additional traffic would be more than we think reasonable for this area. This is a family neighborhood. The additional traffic could prove to be a danger to the children in the neighborhood. 3, the beauty of the neighborhood would be lessened with the addition of more dense housing. This would not only make our neighborhood less attractive to the current residents, but also to those who may look to buy a home in the area. This negatively affects the value of our property and our enjoyment of the neighborhood in which we choose to live. Please consider voting against the change in density requirements here in our quiet family neighborhood. Thank you, Nick and Monica Oldroyd and Young Family, 2620 Desert Road, Manuel and Ginger Torres, 2630 Desert Road, John and Nancy Pickens, 2620 Desert Road, James and Bonnie Grantham, 2610 Desert Road, Larry and Teresa Krausman, 2631 Desert Road, John Pickens, 2741 Desert Road, and Carl and Krista Windsor, 2450 Mesa Road. That was it. Thank you.
Thank you. Mila, did you say you received another email, or was that the email that came in?
Yes, I have another email. Can you all hear me?
Yes, we can hear
Okay,
you.
great. Okay, so the other comment that we have is from Krista Windsor at 2450 Mesa Road, and she writes also verbatim, Dear Commissioners, I am writing to you in regards to this evening's agenda item and public hearing concerning the Desert Mesa HDHO request. As a homeowner in close proximity to this lot, I implore you to not allow a high density overlay in this area. This established neighborhood consists of single homes on lots that are at minimum 0.5 acres. Allowing for one lot to become high density in the middle of an established community feels very ill-advised. I feel as though it will disrupt the cohesiveness within this area and take away from the current atmosphere within our neighborhood. While I very much understand the need for high density areas, I am requesting that each of you strongly consider the surrounding lots and homeowners and vote no.
All right, thank you, Mila.
And I did forward both of those comments on to planning commissioners as well.
Wonderful, thank you. Now, I see two comments in the chat first, and both, I believe, were attached to one of those letters. But I will invite you, Nick, first. Would you like to make your own comment separate from the letter into the record?
Oh, I think that was from me.
Oh gosh,
I'm sorry. Nick Oldroyd was the name of the person that sent the email. And
thank you.
So even though it was from his neighbors as well, but it does look like there's someone on labeled iPhone.
I do see that. Thank you. Sorry, my eyes were reading the black text and glazing over the blue. That's 0 for 2 for me today. That's great. Manuel Torres, sir, I see iPhone is labeled. Is that you? Would you like to come off of mute and make a comment? And you're muted right now, so we can't hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, Manuel, thank you.
Okay. 25 years ago, I bought 6 acres in this area to have open space. Today, my daughter and I owns 3 acres, and my neighbor owns 2.5 acres next to me. The purpose of moving in this area was to have open space, not to have a bunch of small homes built around us. So I think you need to take that into consideration when you make your decision today. I think Mesa Road would be a good road of the split. If you want to keep those houses on the other south of Mesa Road, that's fine. But if you look at it right now, everything north of that is 1/2 acres and 1 dwelling. This gentleman knew when he bought that piece of ground that the rules was 1 dwelling per 1/2 acre. And so I just think that you ought to honor that with the rest of the neighbors that live in our area. Thank you.
Whoop, I was muted. Thank you very much for your comments.
Okay.
Wonderful. Is there anybody else who would like to make a comment during this public hearing that's open right now? All right, I see Nick, who had been attached to the letter that Abby read, just joined. So I'm going to give him a moment to connect his audio and see if he would like to make a comment. Nick, did you join to make a comment or to listen in? Nick Oldroyd, did you want to make a comment in addition to your letter?
No, there's a lot of us who were meeting today and we just feel we don't, I think my letter explained it. We just feel like we don't agree with changing the zone there like it's been changed in the past with the other 2 zoning changes that were changed, one right in my front yard and one just right across the street from this one. It's just going to allow a lot of density in a street that is a dead end. So.
Okay. Thank you for your comments. If there are no additional comments, we'll give the applicant one additional opportunity to come off of mute and address the commission. I will hold this to the 3 minutes that we hold other comments during a public hearing. So Mr. Lent, did you have any additional comments that you wanted to make?
No real additional comments. I mean, we're talking an addition of really 2 extra units. We're already vested for 1. So 2 extra units. It's a small community, but certainly an opportunity for locals to all 3 of them will be local, deed restricted. Our plans right now are to just do lots and to possibly sell off those lots. So I think it's an opportunity for locals that otherwise couldn't afford some of the expensive lots that are out there right now.
All right,
That's it. Thanks, guys.
Okay.
Can I just make one brief comment to that as well, Emily?
Yes, please.
Glenn just mentioned that they're vested for one, though they would also be allowed to have an ADU. So I just wanted to remind the Planning Commission that they, in essence, are actually only adding one dwelling unit. However, all three would be able to be under separate ownership because the ADUs are not allowed to be under the same ownership, or sorry, under separate ownership.
Thank you
So
for
by
that.
that same logic, wouldn't this then be 6 building units if each of these 3 lots built an ADU?
They would be constrained by size.
Okay, so the lots are too small for the proposed lots are too small to support ADUs.
I believe so. I would need to check the calculations, but I'm fairly certain that that's true.
Okay. So I will close the public hearing at 5:39. Would invite any additional conversation or emotion from a planning commissioner. Actually, before we do that, one thing that came up during our last meeting was whether we should be leaving substantive discussions about the merits of a specific motion or possible motion before or after motion. I think if we want to have some basic discussion, that's fine. But if we want to have a discussion on the merits of this, then I will ask a commissioner to make a motion and wait for a second, and then we'll have the discussion after that. Garish.
I make a motion that we recommend the HCHO on this property for no other reason than to start the discussion.
Second.
Okay, so we have a motion on the table from Garish, seconded by Bob. Garish, you're welcome to make your comments.
First off, I think when you look at Desert Road and Mesa, this looks like a pretty good area if higher density was going to go in there. They have good access to both Spanish Valley Drive and the highway. So I think I don't have a problem necessarily with this area. I do have a big problem of allowing a boundary agreement to result in these being undersized lots for the intended HCHO. I think it's a bad precedent that would be set, and I just think we should. 0.2 acres is pretty small. Less than 0.2 acres is even smaller, and I think we should, uphold the intent of the land use code in this instance, and hold the developer to the minimum lot size that is required.
So Garish, I know you made your motion to have conversation, but it sounds like you're suggesting that while you may feel like the application itself holds merit, that this is a procedural concern that you have?
It's not procedural. I would not want us to recommend to the county council that we approve an HCHO for less than 0.2 acre lots. Since 0.2 acres is the minimum lot size that would be allowed here if the HCHO was approved. Does that make sense? So what I'm saying is, if the developer has an issue with has a boundary line dispute with an adjacent landowner, they ought to resolve that first before they come to us.
Kevin? You're muted.
Sorry, I thought I was going to go through this meeting never making that mistake, but oh well. So I think I disagree with Garish on both counts. First, I don't think the boundary line is I don't feel good, denying it for that reason, because, I don't think we want to disincentivize developers from making these sort of good faith lines, to line up with a fence. So I think it kind of sends the wrong message, and the acreage involved is pretty small. So to me, that is not an issue. On the other hand, I'm not inclined to vote for the motion because I actually don't think that this is a good area for additional HDHO density. When we were crafting the HDHO plan a couple of years ago, one of the big debates was, how large should these big polygons be? Should they go way out into the valley, or should they all be close to town or close to 191? And I think the argument that carried the day was we should draw quite a lot of them because we weren't sure whether this is going to be a popular program, and we very much wanted to get takers and build affordable housing. And so now, with the benefit of 2020 hindsight, I think we realized that, hey, we could have made those polygons a lot smaller. That if we were to rank all the areas in Grand County as to their suitability of additional density, we didn't have to go quite so far down that list. It was hard to know that ahead of time, but now we do know it. We only have a few more HDH density bonuses to give out under the cap, and I would prefer to preserve them for areas that are more suitable, i.e. closer to town, closer to the highway, et cetera. So if you just think of all the places that might get proposed for an HDHO over the next year or so, and imagine where this particular proposal ranks in that list, my feeling is it ranks further down, and for that reason, I'm inclined to vote against it. A second reason is we haven't even really started building HDHO units yet, and there might be some kinks or quirks in the system. And so I think we've given these out maybe a little bit too fast, faster than ideal, though I understand why we did it, and I voted for most of those. So I think a second reason is, we've been handing out these density bonuses at a pace that's much faster than anticipated. I think we should let some of them get built, let the deed see how the deed restrictions are going to work in practice before we do more. So that said, I think there's nothing, there's really nothing wrong with this proposal. It's very similar to bunches of others that we've approved, but I think because we've approved the others, we don't have a strong need for this one. And then finally, I think there has perhaps been a few in this particular neighborhood. I think they've already gotten a couple, if I'm not mistaken. And if we're going to approve more HDHO lots, I'd rather be somewhere else in the valley, especially somewhere closer to town in a more dense neighborhood. Thanks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I see your point there. I find the nature of this application of granting land, the opportunity to purchase land, but not to purchase developed land, is something that we haven't seen as much during this, allowing more residents the opportunity to develop their own land, as opposed to following a developer's choice and standards. And I mean, there is the note on the ADU units. This is an area that is adjacent to what we have been discussing as a potential node, but lacking a plan or even plans to create a plan for that node. I think there is a time where if we had a plan and it encouraged that as an economic node in the southern part of the county, I would be more inclined to see this as a viable option. Given the lack of that, I tend to think it might not be the right time. So I see merits on both sides.
Emily, can I just clear something up? I did the calculations, and these lots would actually be allowed to have ADUs. They're just above the allowable 5,000 square feet.
Okay, thank you, Mila. Girish.
Yeah. I want to respond to Kevin. When we were looking at divvying up these parcels, making the maps, the idea was that parcels closer to town would have a higher density. And but that was a concept that I think made some sense, but when you look at where some of the HDHOs have been approved further south away from Moab, it hasn't really panned out. I think that these 3 lots would not probably detrimentally affect the amount of traffic on Mesa Road or Desert Road. And that location has really good access to both Highway 191 and Spanish Valley Drive and Spanish Trail for that matter. However, I would hate for us, I just want to reiterate that I hate for us to set a precedent of allowing any kind of subdivision that we know the proponent is saying the actual acreage is too small for the permitted division to take place. So I just want you all to think about that, you know, if we're going to have a 0.2 acre lot that turns into a 0.187 acre lot, or a 0.2 acre lot that turns into a 0.93 acre lot, there's enough concern about the HDHO as it is, and if the public knows that we are actually entertaining even smaller lot sizes, I think we've lost a lot of credibility. So I think we ought to just keep that in mind before we vote.
All right. Are there any additional comments for conversation? Okay, so I will call the vote. Garish has a motion on the table to send a favorable recommendation to the County Council for applying the High Density Housing Overlay District HDHO 5 to Lot 2 of Desert Mason Subdivision, parcel number 02-0 DSM-0002, seconded by Bob. All in favor of sending a positive recommendation, say aye or raise your hand. Bob? Okay, all opposed? Garish, Rachel, Brian, Kevin, and Emily. So that is, thank you. All right, well, thank you to the applicant and for everybody who made comments. Okay, now we did have another hearing that has been postponed. So we will move on to the Namaste Rock rezone from range grazing to small lot residential. And I see that the applicant is here. So Mila, are you going to give this staff report as well?
Yes, I will. Let me just pull it up here real quick. All right. So you're all very familiar with this area. We did just see a rezone application for this same property to resort commercial. You'll see this is a new application to rezone to single lot residential. I guess I don't have a whole lot to say. The applicant's proposal, the concept proposal has stayed the same. All of the supporting materials are also the same, and that includes the information from the state engineers regarding the capacity of the well. And then the applicant has also done a lot of work with our own health department to make sure that there's a good chance that their sewer system will work. They have developed techniques that will not require the traditional septic. So, and I believe our local health department has approved those for that area. So you'll see the change in use table in your packet. I've highlighted single lot residential. It's currently range and grazing. And I believe that's most of it. I actually can't pull up the staff report right now, so I do apologize. I'm having some serious technological difficulties tonight, but from what I recall, that's what we're facing. You should have the rest of the information should be in your packet. As you'll recall, rezones are not meant to be based on the conceptual plan that's presented, but rather you need to consider all of the possible uses for the new zone in that area. A rezone does not bind the applicant to their conceptual plans. So while it is required for the application as supporting information, but no need to decide just on that. It's better to just decide based on whether or not you think all of the allowed uses in the new zone would be appropriate for that area.
Thank you, Mila. Are there any questions for staff? All right. So Michael, I see that you are on. Would you like to address the commission with any comments?
Yeah, can we go ahead and do our presentation after any public comments so I can address those?
I think I'd prefer if you did the presentation ahead of time, but you will have an opportunity to address any comments that come up. That's the format that we've tended to follow.
Oh, fantastic. So we have been looking at what good options for this land for some time. We first bought the property, it was highway commercial, or let me correct myself. The map erroneously said it was highway commercial. We checked the ordinances, it's never been highway commercial. We're adjacent to highway commercial. Anyway, we're in between a gas station, a campground that's heavily packed with RVs and Moab under canvas. Anyway, it's a high density area. Many things should be appropriate in this area. I noticed that staff didn't give a favorable recommendation, and I think that's anyway. There's some valid concerns there, and we hope to address those. But the point of view we had when we came this is when we applied for highway commercial, we got a 3-3 vote, and one recommendation was, let's go ahead and put residential in the back and commercial on the front and do a subdivided and get a rezone. Anyway, it takes, you have to design a flood plan. It's actually a pretty significant amount of work to do that. And so we wanted to, the thought of this is that why don't we just make the whole thing residential? There's a member of the group that doesn't want, a member of Namaste that doesn't want restaurants on the frontage, and they're not necessary. We were happy to serve the county in that way if that was their desire, and it may not be. And so this is to bring across a different point of view. Let's just make the whole thing residential. I mean, a lot of the other proposals in the area, they propose overnight accommodations, and then they go ahead and give you, for granting that, they give you residential, long-term residential for employees. Anyway, this is 24 fantastic acres where you'll have people that can go ahead and create a community. It won't be just a small section and then short-term rentals. This will be something that a community can be established, and people will get to know their neighbors. Anyway, it's perhaps this is not what's needed in this area, but I think it works. I think it's, anyway, you have people at the airport, and not all these people want to drive into Moab every day. You have Skydive Utah has approached us for housing in this area. A number of the other people that work there have approached us. And so anyway, I think I think that it's something that we can put anyway. It'll all be residential housing, all long-term residential housing. That's what the zoning allows. And so anyway, go ahead and consider this. I understand that staff didn't give it the recommendation. I'm not fully sure why that is. It is a spot zone, of course, but we're next to highway commercial that allows 18 units per acre. And this is a step down that allows 5 units per acre. And I think it's appropriate. It's not appropriate to have range and grazing right adjacent to highway commercial. So anyway, thank you for your time. I'm happy that we have the fantastic people on the Planning Commission that care so much, and the new applicants that come. And thank you for your service.
Thank you very much, Michael. Are there any questions for the applicant?
I have a question. It may or may not, may not be very relevant, but actually you show us a zoning map and it comes up and says the zoning designation is highway commercial resort special. And then it says if more than one is listed, look at the zoning layers for more information. And I'm just curious what it says when you looked at the zoning map for more information.
Yeah, I mean, there wasn't additional information, and I should have done better due diligence before I purchased the property. But anyway, the question at this point is not so much what the error was. I've taken my knocks on that and I'm good with that. But I presented it because it once said that we were highway commercial and we're adjacent to highway commercial, and that zoning it wasn't completely crazy. It wasn't a spot zone. It was adjacent. We're currently adjacent to two parcels that are highway commercial, and it extends as far east as we are. And so I think it's appropriate. Let me also give this, the Planning Commission and their map is fantastic. It's the best map that the county has, and a bit of me feels, anyway, it's a map that I use still, and it's tremendously helpful. It was slightly deceiving at that stage, but I appreciate the work that they've put into it.
Michael, have you been following along in the conversations at the county council level around crafting a small area plan for this area? I know that I've seen you on our calls. I mean, I'd just be curious to know your plans to bring it at this point with this designation as part of your application versus being a part of that process. I'm just curious how involved you've been so far there related to this development.
I've been in attendance, and I've commented at the past past meetings. I am fully wanting to be involved on whatever capacity is available, and I also understand that there's a process where sometimes you guys need space, and so I want to honor. I want to be helpful, and I want to give you space. And so, anyway, I've watched every county council meeting and every planning commission meeting, and anyway, I've looked at the survey, and I think that the questions are fantastic. I appreciate the great work you've done.
All right. Any other questions for the applicant before we open the public hearing? Okay, so at 6:02, I'll open the hearing. Again, if you are here to make a comment on this application, could you just drop your name in the chat window on the right? If you're not able to do that, I'll ask you to come off of mute just a moment so we can make sure that you have an opportunity to comment. So I don't see anything coming into the chat. Is there anybody who is called in or unable to leave a message in the chat window who would like to make a comment? If so, could you come off of mute right now and your face will pop up to the top of our screen. All right. Well, I think that's sufficient time since there's the delay on YouTube. Okay. did you have anything you wanted to add, Michael, or otherwise I'm going to go ahead and close the hearing.
No, that's fantastic. If it's possible, I noticed at the county council level, they gave indication of what may be possible. Anyway, the staff has not recommended this, and I don't fully understand that. If people could maybe raise a hand and give me like 5 fingers, 5 being we support other recommendations such as you want commercial there, you want overnight accommodations, you want residential. Anyway, maybe that's the subject for later.
Yeah,
but
let's hit pause on that. Yeah. No, but I appreciate that you have made a very good intent to work with both this body and with the county council. So I'm going to close the public hearing at 6:04. So we had no public comments there. Having read staff's recommendation, there's sort of 2 things here. There's the concern that they raise around spot zoning, but also the fact that we are, even in this meeting, discussing a small area plan. And what I have heard consistently echoed by the Planning Commission and also by the County Council is not an unwillingness to consider different options in this area, but an intent to look at the area holistically and address the characteristics of any individual parcel against the whole first, and then use that to say, do we think that this particular application of the several that we have received in the area aligns with our long-term planning goals for this particular part of the county? And so I think in staff's recommendation, you see both of those captured. Just something to keep in mind. I know that you're very interested in getting some direction from this body. I am going to ask the commissioners to have our discussion, and if there is a motion, we will address that first. And then if we have any further guidance following that, we'll take that up after any motion that comes forward. So are there any comments or discussion by commissioners, or does anybody wish to make a motion?
I had a question for staff. I guess I forgot to ask earlier, but so that 25% open space. So if these were small lot residential, can you just clarify, like back, that if there's basically if every house has 25% open space, then that would count and you can develop the whole property?
I'm sorry, I don't entirely understand your question.
So if you look at, okay, that recreation, hold on, hold on a second. Where is it? Should have pulled it up. So the current plan for the area that's located in like a recreation development area.
Oh, you mean the northeast corridor?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So North Corridor Recreation.
Right.
And so
this is page 62 of the packet, if anyone.
Yeah, or 54, or either one. Yeah. So so that 25% open space would still apply, correct, to small lot residential, but that could be like backyard open space or does it a 25% have, because the way the proposal was written, it would be fully developed across, it would maximize the density in the area. So there wouldn't be a set aside outside the lots. So that's kind of how that works?
I believe so. I will say that this plan, or this North Corridor Recreation Zone, was designated more than 10 years ago. And I don't believe we've used it all that much. The text does say new commercial development rather than residential. So I would not imagine that it would actually apply to this residential development. However, it does suggest that a rural density residential development is most appropriate for this area. So I don't think the 25% specifically applies, but the intent was to have more of a rural density, at least according to this older plan.
Kevin?
I'll make a motion if we're ready for that. I move to send an unfavorable recommendation for the rezone request from range and grazing to small lot residential to the county council.
I think we're supposed to only make positive motions. I believe that's the practice, is to try to just make positive motions, and that then when they fail, that is an unfavorable recommendation. I think that's what we've been doing.
We've sent unfavorable recommendations in the past.
Yeah, we've done that in the past, and I've been to county council meetings where there was a little bit of confusion, or we did just vote down a positive recommendation, and the report of the council seemed a little wishy-washy. So I think it's much clearer just to make an unfavorable recommendation.
Okay, I think that's fine. I think Robert's rule suggests that we try to only make positive motions, but if we don't want to do that right now, let's not, and then I'll try and clarify and see if there's any particular rules we have to follow.
Thank you. So we'll stick with precedent for today and Robert moving forward if need be. So
yeah, I'm happy to discuss this.
Okay, so Kevin made the motion, seconded by Bob. Garris, I see your hand, but I'm going to let Kevin make a comment first.
Okay. Yeah. So I guess Michael asked a lot of questions and made a lot of points, and I want to try to address some of them. So I think one of my main reasons for being opposed to this is it's sort of, rather than spot zoning, it will be spot rezoning. I think there was a past planning effort for this northern corridor area, and the output of that planning effort was the resort special zone, which allows for a mix of residential and commercial uses, but those uses are somewhat constrained in an attempt to preserve other values in the area. And if you look at a map with there's two exceptions of the highway commercial, but most of the other parcels that are not range and grazing are resort special. So in my mind, I think the only appropriate zoning change for this area would be to resort special. Anything else is sort of deviating from a past planning effort, and I don't think we should do that parcel by parcel. If we don't like resort special zone, if we don't think it matches this area, maybe because it doesn't allow some things that Michael wants to do and we like his plans, or maybe because we think it's too permissive. Either way, then we should do like a small area plan, which in fact we are doing right now. So that is my main reason. I think that a likely outcome of this planning process, or certainly something that's going to be on the table, is to make possibly some changes to the existing resort special zone, to update it now that it's been 10 years, and then that will be the preferred zone for this area. And so I'm imagining that will allow both residential and commercial uses. And so it's not, I just wanted to make it clear, it's not like I think this parcel should never be developed, it should always stay range and grazing. That's not the message, but I do think that we need careful planning in this area. We've got the old planning consensus, which is around the resort special zone, and we've got this new process, which I think we should hit the pause button until we finish that. The final point I wanted to make, something that's come up a lot in these discussions as well, there's this highway commercial right by it. I find that a very unconvincing argument. I think the plopping highway commercial in that area was a bad mistake by a previous county council. I'm imagining it was done just because there was some use, one particular use they wanted to permit. It wasn't allowed in the resort special zone, so they just looked for a zone that did allow it, and it was highway commercial. But then that allows all these other uses, which is probably not what they intended. So it was just bad planning all around by our predecessors, and I don't think we should allow that bad planning to then spread like some, I don't know, disease. you know, it shouldn't be allowed to propagate to all the adjacent parcels saying, well, if this one's highway commercial, then this one should be too. I guess I do not find that kind of logic convincing at all. So, yeah, so that's what I think. And I've tried to respond to the main points that Michael made, and I'm happy to respond, you know, at other times to anything else. Thanks.
Bob is the second. Did you have any comment?
Yeah, only in that, you know, I'm looking at this kind of North Corridor recreation quote, actually from Michael's quote, this designation encourages nodes of tourism-oriented resort commercial development, rural density, residential development, and I would say probably small lot residential doesn't fit at least that part of the corridor plan. And of course, we're stuck in this place until we get a small area plan out there of not knowing exactly maybe what we want there. It's not clear to me that we want small lot residential. Maybe we will in some areas. So it's in some senses a little bit too early. Resort special, I agree probably with Kevin. That would be a rezone that might work. Of course, we're still in this place where we're maybe 4 or 5 months too early to know.
Garish, I know you had a comment earlier.
Oh, I didn't really have a comment. I was going to second the motion. I didn't realize that Bob had already seconded it. Sorry.
It's confusing doing all of this over Zoom, for sure. Brian or Rachel, did either of you have any additional comment?
I did. Anyhow, maybe we should share with Mr. Sarda, excuse me, our time frame. Isn't it we're going to have a recommendation in December for the council on the small area plan? I mean, that is our goal, right?
Yes, I think we have the specific calendar in the packet, or at least we did.
I didn't see it in the packet.
Yeah, I guess we didn't include it. It's probably something we should be including going forward. But yes, the intent is to have opportunity for public hearing, including public meetings, hopefully social distanced and in person and outside, if not in a remote setting, to have a drafting period and then a draft. I believe we set up the council vote for the first meeting of theirs in December, which means we give them the draft at the end of November, if I recall correctly.
Okay.
Yeah. But the intent is to have this plan finalized by county council by the end of the year. So we go into the new year without this being on our table. Thanks. And just a note for staff, I think it would be great to keep that timeline in the packet for our own sakes, as well as for reference of the community.
Okay, that sounds good. We can do that. And I do think that we're probably going to need to push that back a little bit, but I think our goal by the end of the year is still hopefully worked in there.
Okay, we can pick that up. And I will just also add that staff is doing a wonderful job of consolidating information up front with the plans to set up a website that will be available to the public, which we'll get more information on later in this meeting. So you will be able to stay very close to the process, as well as, of course, continuing to be involved in meetings and so on in whatever way. This is to the applicant as well as to anybody who's listening in. Rachel, did you have any additional comment before we call the vote?
No, I would say, you know, kind of regarding Bob's comment that you know, it's sort of, I feel bad for the applicants. It's been very confusing for them. But I think that we're kind of doing the best plan, and that we didn't know how to vote on all these proposals coming up. And, you know, it's almost like that past plan fit a little bit more in line with that recreation zone. but I don't think at this time, I think that the density, you know, if I were just to look at it at face value, the density of the housing there, you know, it's sort of unprecedented in that area. And I just really need to know how the public feels about, you know, high visibility developments, especially in that area.
I wanted to follow up on Rachel's comment about density. If I'm not mistaken, I think the resort special zone is 5 acre lot minimum. And the small lot residential is quite a bit less than that, maybe almost 100 times denser. I'm not sure. And so I think for that I wouldn't want to make that big a change in density just on a parcel by parcel basis. I think that if one thinks that it makes more sense to build more densely out there and maybe townhomes make more sense than detached houses on large lots, I think the time to make that argument is when we're doing this planning process. Then we can have a thorough discussion and think about what it means for the whole area. But I don't think that's the sort of decision we should be making via spot rezoning.
All right. So we have a question on the table from Kevin, seconded by Bob, to send an unfavorable recommendation of the Namaste Rock rezone from range and grazing to small lot residential to the Grand County Council. So I see the confusion of the phrasing, but we're going to stick with it for precedence sake. So all in favor of Kevin's motion, raise your hand or say aye. Okay, that's unanimous. So I just want to echo, that we appreciate your involvement through this process, and we recognize that it's been confusing at times and certainly not as fast moving as would be ideal for your circumstances at time. But this is something that we are prioritizing now at the county level. Garish did make the comment earlier in the meeting that we haven't always been consistent about whether or not our citizens to be heard portion of this call should include anything that isn't on the agenda at all or anything that isn't in public hearing. So moving forward from this meeting, I think it's wise to follow county council's lead. But I would like to invite you, as well as anybody who else is in the call, as we move over to our discussion item on the small area plan, to make any comments as a citizen that you think are necessary in addition to your comments from the public hearing. As we discuss the survey, as we discuss how to move forward. So Mr. Sarda, if you would like to make any additional comments as a citizen to be heard during this period, you're welcome to do so. And anybody else who'd like to make a comment, you'll be able to do so as well.
And Emily, I would just like to remind anybody who's in this meeting that the OKRV Park public hearing was postponed until a later date. I think that maybe one, at least of these people has come for that, possibly.
Thank you. Did we set a date for that postponement, or is it indefinite at this point?
No, we're waiting for materials from the applicant, so we're not sure yet.
Okay, thank you. All right, so are there any citizens who want to speak about our discussion item related to the small area plan for the 313-191 intersection? Okay, well, thank you to our applicants this evening and to everybody who made comments. We appreciate your involvement in the process. We'll now turn over to our discussion item on the small area plan to discuss the citizen comment survey, which was drafted largely by Kevin Walker, and my thanks to you because that's a wonderful start for us. Would love an update on the workshop and also on the website. So Abby or Mila, I don't know if one of you would want to update from the staff side, and then we can see where the discussion takes us.
Sure. Abby had to go, so she's actually not going to be here for the rest of the meeting. But so we do have this survey. I think there was sounds like a small change to be made to one of those questions. So we'll try to get those figured out. And then we have a QR code, and the survey has been put online on a SurveyMonkey. So we are ready to disseminate it to the public as soon as we've finalized all of the questions. So if anybody wants to make any additional comments, either in this forum or via email later, if we have any specific wording to change, then we'll be able to start sending that out probably tomorrow.
So Mila, will there be a chance to look at the SurveyMonkey version before it goes public?
Sure. Yeah, we can definitely make that happen. Olivia's put that together for us so she can send the link around.
Okay, that'd be great.
Kevin, can you state back the changes that Reed Pendleton brought up in his comment. There was one to question one section, question one, section
One
A.
thing that needed corrected. So I think at the beginning, section A, these sort of broad proposals, there was something that said, you know, this is like the low development option, and it said undeveloped undeveloped parcels will remain range and grazing. And Reed correctly pointed out that there are undeveloped parcels that are zoned resort special or something. So it should probably change to read, you know, undeveloped parcels will be left with their existing zoning, which is some mixture of range and grazing, resort special, maybe highway commercial or something.
Yeah, no, that was my understanding of his comment as well. And then he also just raised some confusion about the code tables and what was and wasn't included.
Well, I guess trying to infer that since we didn't ask about every use that's allowed in the highway commercial zone, does that therefore mean that we're set on downzoning that the parcels that are zoned highway commercial? And I just don't think that's the implication. You know, we're asking about a cross section of uses that have come up the most often. So.
I think it's worth adding a comment to that effect just to clarify, since if we had one person who was confused, it's likely there would be others, and it's best to be as clear as possible. So can we add a comment above that just specifying the intent behind the items that are included in the survey under the examples from the uses from the code table? Does that sound?
I mean,
any issue with that, or?
I guess I would want to see the specific wording, but sounds okay. I mean, there's a danger if you add too many clarifications and the whole thing becomes harder to read, but it doesn't sound like that's what you're proposing.
I think we're comfortable just adding one sentence of just saying these are examples from the code table and are not exhaustive to show us comparisons across the different underlying zones. Okay. Any other comments or edits about the survey? Garish?
I got to switch back to it, so hang on a second. Kevin split out, or the survey now shows specific uses, and it talks about gas stations, truck stops, mountain bike rentals, denser housing, industrial uses. And then under 3, it talks about overnight accommodations. And I'm wondering if it makes sense if we got all those uses but overnight accommodations not listed there, does that make sense to everybody else? Because it seems to me that an expansion of specific uses going into an overnight accommodations might make the survey easier to understand. Am I the only dense person reading this and having a...
I can explain why it's that way. I mean, you know, there is this countywide policy now. Overnight accommodations are not a use by right anywhere. And I don't think we're going to deviate from that in the small area plan. So the overnight accommodation type uses, they are different from all those others, and I think it makes sense to put them in a separate category. All those others would potentially become uses by right. I think there's no one's proposing to add overnight accommodations as a use by right. It would just be some possibly permitted uses via legislative decision. So they're very different, and I think they shouldn't be in the same list.
That makes sense to me.
I think I had made a comment to the effect of your concern, Garish, in the doc in the sort of first version, because I also felt like since this isn't listed in the code table form, I actually think adding it in, noise in the background, I think adding it in made sense to me. I also see the reasons for leaving it out. So I, err on the side of how the rest of the commission feels. But I think it does make sense to pull it. I mean, we do have an overlay that can be utilized in that area, even if we are choosing not to at this moment, as far as what we've seen come before the county. Or otherwise in restating specific uses, maybe as opposed to adding my added sentence, we say The following is a list of existing uses by right that could apply to the existing underlying zones. Which do you think should be allowed in this area and which do not? I think maybe, or which do you think should be allowed in this area? Question mark might be a more clear way of asking.
Except that they aren't, some of those are not uses by right currently in the current zone.
Not in all of them, but they are potential. I don't want to overbake this, but I do see the potential for confusion. And I think framing this just so that we're clear about what we are trying to gauge from this question. Because if we're just saying, you know, what do you think belongs here? I would imagine the county would be interested in knowing whether or not the citizens of our county have an overwhelming interest to potentially see overnight accommodations here, which could direct them towards considering that sort of application in this zone. So,
but we are asking about overnight accommodations.
But to Garish's point of confusion, like I said, I don't want to overbake this, but I can see why it might be included.
Yeah, I guess it's just to say a little bit more. I think, you know, the community right now is very sensitive to overnight accommodations. And I imagine if we just saying, hey, we want to, you know, go back to the old way of doing things where, you know, campgrounds will be a use by right, you know, that might get a large negative thing, but no one's actually proposing that. I think what people want to do, what like Reed Pendleton, for example, wants to do, is he wants to establish a campground, you know, not as a use by right, but, you know, just have it be allowed. And so I think, you know, I think polling what people think about the more extreme version, the use by right version, is likely to get a more negative response than saying, okay, we've already got all these checks and balances in place in the county. Given that, do you think, you know, we should maybe allow it here?
Bob, Rachel, Brian.
Yeah, I think I agree with Kevin on this one. It's probably good to have.
Oh,
I'm sorry, probably good to have it separated out.
okay. Brian, Rachel, any other comments on this or any other part of the survey?
I don't see really the need to have it in there, but it's not going to hurt anything to have it in there as it is. I think people can separate it in their mind. So either way is fine with me.
So Garish, I think to answer your question, you're not the only dense person. I also was a dense person who was confused by that, but I also see the reason for excluding it. So no, I appreciate the conversation.
I guess another question for all of us is, are there other specific uses that should be on that list? You know, I just tried to think of everything that I knew that was proposed or was allowed. And, you know, I was trying to hit the highlights of things allowed by the resort special zone and things that have been proposed by, you know, in the last year, but I might have missed something. So
I wonder why we call out UTV rentals and mountain bike rentals, but no other types of rentals. We do have businesses in town that provide general outdoor rec rentals. And I wonder if I see the value of calling those out specifically, but we may wish to include, I think we should include another option just for general rentals or similar retail.
I think it was called, originally it's outfitter, like outfitter services or something. And that included, you know, basically any kind of rentals or,
yeah,
you know, interfacing with the public on sort of guiding or rental of equipment. So it has some term.
I mean, we have J, other tourist oriented businesses, but I feel like that's very vague. Kevin, do you want to speak to the types of businesses that you imagined when you wrote that? And maybe we can break that out into a few more discrete.
I mean, was this, you know, what kind of things are going out there? And so far it's been mostly tourist oriented things like campgrounds and museums, et cetera. And there's been some talk of making it a denser node. And I imagine if it was a denser node, it would be geared toward tourists. So I was just trying to cover that. But if there's something specific like an I don't know what other rental categories there are, but.
I think we should add tourism related rental and retail, or other tourism related rental retail, and also add an option for tourism related outfitters.
Okay.
So let's scratch J as written and replace it with those two. Tourism related rentals and retail, excuse me, other tourism related rentals and retails below UTV and mountain bike rentals, and tourism related outfitters. Yeah, do we agree with that, or is there any concern about that?
Yeah, we don't need to belabor the point too much, but the, yeah, I'm pretty sure it before outfitter encompassed guide services, rentals, and retail. So, you know, I don't know, maybe that's something to ask staff is what is under that umbrella of outfitter, but that's kind of how I imagine it.
I can think of at least 3 businesses in town that fit into both categories. So I think keeping them separate, I mean, they are different. They have different types of clientele, different velocity or you know, I don't know.
Oh, okay, I see. You want to separate them out. Okay, yeah, then rental, retail, and probably guide / outfitter services or something like that.
I like that. So other tourism related rental and retail, and guide, outfitters. Cool. Okay. Question for staff. So we're getting this into the SurveyMonkey format with an opportunity to review. And I'm sorry if you said this earlier, but what is the planned publication date to send this out to the public at this point?
As soon as it's confirmed by Planning Commission. So it sounds like we'll just fix these last couple edits, and then we'll be ready to send it out as soon as that's done.
Wonderful. And is the website going to be ready at that time too?
Yeah, that'll be fine. Well, and you know, we're planning on that mostly being a work in progress as things, as we have more information. It seems like right now we pretty much just have kind of our general scope of work and the map of the area that we're looking at, and then the survey. So that's what we're planning on putting up there right now, unless commissioners would like to see any other supplemental information or have anything else that they'd like for the public to know.
One other item I would like to add is maybe a training, you know, maybe a school related training related business or something. Somehow it's not really tourist related, but it's more a training center or outdoor school or something.
Sort of like how we have outfitters who have satellite camps in places in the county.
Not necessarily a camp, more like a destination training area. You know, if somebody wants to come in to train them about mountain biking or something, you know, or some kind of a school, or I'm not sure how exactly I want to word it. Some kind of a training or school related business, maybe.
I wonder if that couldn't be nested under outfitter, but then we add an option for other and allow people to submit additional uses that may not be listed here. I mean, I recognize that we may be, you know, skinning the cat a little bit, but I think the more we give clarity and ask for clarity from the community. Brian, do you want to like wordsmith that a little bit and see if you can come up with a specific way you want to frame it and decide if that's something you want to add in or if we want to nest it under something?
So one possible thing that might fit Brian's idea is outdoor education. I mean, that's a category that already exists.
Mm-hmm.
So just outdoor education businesses or establishments or something.
Is the commission comfortable with that? Okay, great.
I'm fine.
You know, with Brian saying these things, I do actually always like the other category where people can put in things they want. And I think 2 fits a thing where you have a final option that says other, and then people can put their dream businesses or services out there.
Okay. Any clarification that staff needs for those suggestions?
I don't think so. We'll work on getting that taken care of, and then we'll send it around another time so you'll have another chance to look at it and we can clarify then.
Okay, fantastic. And since that's been a work in progress over several meetings, do we feel like that's something that we can approve now that we have sort of the preliminary approval here over email, or do we need to wait for our next meeting? I hope we don't have to wait for our next meeting to get that published, but just want to make sure.
I'm good with email.
I am too, and seeing the Survey Monkey and then approving it or not.
All right, perfect. Okay. How did the conversation with the county council go? I'm sorry I wasn't able to make it. Kevin, were you able to speak on that? I know you were going to be there for part of the meeting, but not all.
I was there to make the presentation about, wanting to set a date, and
I don't think that was, do you want to just restate exactly what the comment was? Sorry, thank you.
So I'm reporting to the Planning Commission now. Is that what's happening? Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I got this crazy last minute thing in request to be at a county council meeting because Emily couldn't make it. And I think it was just to ask them, hey, we want to have a workshop with you. What's a good date? And so that is a good summary of the discussion. I tried to be brief and I didn't, but then they didn't discuss it until much later in the meeting. And I think I heard they wanted to do it on their meeting, which is the 21st, but I think Jaylen's on this call, so if she's listening right now, she can chime in and let me know if that's correct. Or if anyone else happens to know definitively that 21st was the day.
Jaylen, do you want to come off mute if you can?
I'm off. Always lurking in the background.
Thank you.
Yes, that's correct. Council is, as far as I recall, is going to start a workshop at 2 p.m. Now, the order of that workshop might be up for negotiation because part of the workshop will also be working through how we want to do some possible reorganization in the county in relation to economic development. And so I guess Chris Baird would like to know about how much time the Planning Commission feels would cover this topic with the council. And I think he said his part, the discussion he wants to have about economic development would probably take an hour-ish. So, oh, you know what? I think they said 1 o'clock, actually. It's a 1 hour. Yeah, 1 o'clock workshop, hopefully with time for a small break before council meeting.
Oh, Jaylen, sorry, I think there might be an echo on your end. So let's just quickly as a commission review what we want to get out of that workshop with council, because they are giving us some of their time to make sure that we are aligned on this. I'd love to hear just from all of you coming out of that meeting with that workshop with council, what is it that we think we need to know in order to move forward? And we can use that to make a discrete request for time in their schedule.
So will we have survey results by the 21st?
I hope that we would have some. I think a lot of the time you get a good response, early in the effort. So we'll be disseminating it online and hopefully a couple other ways, and we should have at least some preliminary results by then.
Garish, I'd love your opinion on this, because when we were doing, you served as chair when we were working on the HDHO and the overnight accommodation overlay topics, and we had workshops with council for both. Some of the things we heard were just debate about current uses, things they did or did not absolutely want to see, things they've heard from their constituents. Can you shed any light on what you think a proper objective or ask might be, and how we might reflect that?
Well, I think we have an advantage here in that when we were working through the ACHO, we weren't really driving the discussion so much. And so we have an opportunity now to say, this is specifically what we want to talk about and frame it the way we feel like it needs to be framed, and say, if we have survey data back by that time, we can say, this is an indication of what we've been hearing. How detailed a plan do you want? Have we overlooked some potential uses? Have we overlooked some prohibitions? That sort of thing. To really get a dialogue going so that we have an idea of what the target is that we're trying to aim for.
I love that suggestion, and that prompted me to think, in preparation for this, I think it would be helpful if we gathered any comments or artifacts from existing applications that have been made for that area in the last 5 years, potentially, and provide that to commission and council ahead of time to review, because that, along with the survey itself, is probably the best quantitative, or at least captured information that we have related to this area and community concern and community interest in certain uses. There may also be some comments that came up during the overnight accommodations overlay discussions, and before Zachariah leaves staff, he might be able to shed some light on any relevant information from that process as well, and include those. But I think it would be helpful ahead of time to aggregate that, and that could be a really great place to start to react to, hey, this is this application or that application, and this makes me feel this or that based off of what I've heard and what we're seeing in the survey data that we should be thinking about.
And we've heard that when we're doing outreach to try to generate, to solicit opinions, I think Reed Pendleton made the point yet, we need to make sure that the industry that he represents or that he's a part of is consulted. I would also say that Intrepid Potash, who owns a lot of there's not a whole lot of private property, but they own some of the private property in that general area, that we ought to make sure that the general manager at Intrepid or someone gets an invitation from us to participate.
In the workshop or in the process in general?
No, I'm sorry, in the process.
Okay.
Make sure that we get the our questionnaire sent out to representatives of those industrial or commercial uses.
If that's the,
Go ahead, Bob. No, please.
Oh, if that's the case, certainly the national park, who has concerns about water oftentimes, should be included in that kind of an outreach.
Oh, definitely, Bob. And we have a very short list of who to contact, and the National Park Service is already on that list,
right,
as is the MOP, Canyonlands Watershed Council, but I'm thinking we ought to try to cast as big a net as possible so that we don't get kind of last minute comments of, hey, we weren't represented and we have some valid opinions about this plan.
So let me just play back what I'm hearing so far. To your comment, Garish, if the list we've come up with, knowing that the potential list of stakeholders here could be very large, we've identified these nonprofits that have a specific interest to water, which is something that the county council raised. We have the National Park Service, which obviously has a stake in the area, and current landowners in that area are, sort of the list of stakeholders that we've come up with. I think it would be great to get that list to the county council ahead of their meeting next week just to make sure that if there's anybody, I mean, just to include in the packet for information and ask them if there's anyone who's not here, please call it out. We probably can send it to them by email as well ahead of time, but I just think that let's make sure to be really aggressive about that, to make sure that if there is a voice that is not being heard, that a council member would like to see recognized, we get ahead of that. As for the workshop, so we have survey data, we have potential previous applications, previous citizen comment related to that area as things we may wish to review. So I think spending 10 minutes on a overview of that staff could present would be helpful. Garish, you brought up asking how detailed they want the plan to be. Potential uses that they may raise that we should be paying particular attention to, as well as potential uses that they do not think should be supported in the area that we should be paying attention to as we're hearing citizen comment. So if we took 10 or 15 at the top for staff to present the survey and any questions or conversation to come out of that, if we provided some of these questions ahead of time so that council members can be considering them and use 15 minutes for just sort of open discussions of those discrete questions to get a sense for the council, and then maybe spend the last 30 minutes with some open conversation based off of those two items, with our ability to just sort of converse with each other, ask clarifying questions, allow council members to extend their thoughts on anything that's come up. So that gives us an hour that I think is reasonable for us to request of their time. Is there anything that would need to be captured in that meeting that wasn't just sort of played back that would take more time than that hour block?
Emily, maybe this fits in with what you already said, especially the free open conversation at the end, but it seems to me that our next step, once we get the input from the survey data, is to start basically crafting specific alternatives. And perhaps, it might have been more convenient if this workshop were 2 weeks later, but we could just ask, the council members and ourselves, what's something do you think would make sense, that we should be considering here, and go around and just see some preliminary reactions to that. Obviously, we're not going to be making decisions, but it's good to know kind of where other people are, because I think one of the purposes of this workshop is that we don't wander off in some direction that the council is not going to be happy with. So.
I almost wonder if along that line, playing off of the first survey question, so going deeper into that and using each of those as a potential alternative and as a sort of, straw man or proxy for us to gather their input around appetite for development, type of development, and so on. So I think that does fit into that broader conversation, but if we went into that with something to put in front of them and said, these are alternatives that we think sort of capture the spectrum of opportunities, what is missing from these three, or does one or two of the three feel like the direction we should be focusing on? How do you feel about that, Kevin? Does that kind of capture generally intent? Okay. So that's a pretty loose agenda. I don't think it's, Mila, please correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think it's a huge burden for staff to collect those artifacts ahead of time with time to review. And that would mean our request of council is 1 hour. Any comments or concerns from, okay. Yeah, sorry, I was talking over you.
Oh, no, sorry.
Did I hear you say, yes, that sounds good?
Yes, I think that sounds good. And we'll confirm, the details of what exactly we're looking for. And then I think we can put together a loose agenda as well based on the conversation tonight.
Perfect. Rachel, Brian, did either of you have any additional comments, or Bob or Garish or Kevin? Okay. Well, thank you everyone for helping to make this happen so quickly. And especially Kevin, thank you for drafting that survey so we had something concrete to look at, and staff for your support there. I'm really excited to see this conversation moving forward. I feel like, it's always difficult to place a pause or time for consideration on anything. And I think we are doing a great job with just diligence and moving forward, leaning towards citizen involvement and transparency. So thank you, everyone. Okay, so we've, and I apologize, I was confused by this, the postpone in parentheses. This is because we postponed it from our last meeting. Are we prepared to talk about the OAO redevelopment? I know Abby had to drop, so do we need to postpone that again to our next meeting?
Sorry, not to clarify yet. We decided to postpone that because we figured that this was already going to be such a long meeting.
Okay. Not a big deal because it's a discussion item, but let's keep the way that we note postponements consistent in the packet, at least for my own brain, which as you can tell gets a little muddled when I'm trying to process that.
Yeah, sorry about that. I know we denoted the OKRV Park postponement in a different way.
No worries, no worries. I appreciate it though.
You prefer?
The bold, I had the front bold in front of it is great.
Okay, perfect. Sorry about that.
No, you're all good. I appreciate it. It gets to 6:54 and the wires are not as, twisted tight as they should be. So great. County Council action items report.
So I'll probably let Jalen take most of this. There was a quite long discussion on the Viewgate phase 1. Not Viewgate, oh, goodness, Peak View. You can see the confusion there on the Peak View phase 1 plat. And it ended up being denied. And there were some disagreements between the developers and the county attorney that were not able to be worked out before the meeting. And I would be interested to hear what Jalen's summary is of that situation. It was unusual.
Oh, good. I had just decided that I was going to let planning staff go ahead and give a report on the votes because you have been doing that. So I didn't even prepare for that today. But yeah, it was very interesting and very, I'll just use the word weird. Because on the one hand, a no vote, okay, on the one hand, a yes vote was voting for something that the developer had already said they would not do. And a no vote, I'm not really sure what that meant because both a yes and a no vote meant the project wasn't going forward. So yeah, I don't, what else would you like to know about that? It was very strange. I mean, the developer ultimately agreed there were 3 conditions. One was that they abide by the prorated percentage of HDHO, well, the affordable units going in at the same time the market rate units went in because they wanted to do it in phases. Phase 1 only had 16 units. They originally wanted to only do 7 of those affordable, whereas the code says they need to do 13 of them affordable. But they had they looked at the wording of the ordinance and they'd had their way with the wording, but the legislative intent was clear. So they said, fine, that's okay. We'll go that we can stick with that. And then another one was, oh gosh, you guys remind me.
For the bike path, whether that was going to
right, the bike path. They had read things they thought that they had to provide an upfront bonding for a bike, the multi-use path for the entire length of their project, even though they were only doing a small portion of that length in phase 1. And we clarified that no, that's not the case. You're responsible for the phase 1 as you develop it. So that was fine too. The thing that they could not budge on was the drainage issues. And the person whose property they wanted to drain the water onto, the stormwater, also was not budging, and they wanted the county to indemnify a private citizen, and not best practices, never been done before in our county. And so that's where we ended up at. And it was a 3-3 vote, 3 yeses, 3 noes. Shall I continue?
I'll just comment briefly. I listened to that discussion for an hour, and then I gave up and went out for a walk, but it still wasn't over at that point. So
what can we learn from that as a planning commission as we are, I mean, I realize this is, you know, coming before your body, but what, is there any guidance that you would give us as we're considering applications that we could reduce the churn, or was it just the nature of the beast?
I think it was just the nature. Apparently this, I mean, the HDHO was approved last November. That was applied to the property. And the last 8 months or however long that is, planning staff has been going back and forth with the developer, and basically the developer is the one who insisted that it come before the council because they just wanted some resolution. They knew that asking for that third condition was probably not going to fly. They knew it wasn't flying with planning staff, but they wanted to put it before the council so the council could make a decision, which the council does have that discretion to waive that requirement. It didn't happen, and I'm not sure where this is all going next. It'll be interesting to watch, but I don't think the Planning Commission could have headed all of that off. I think you guys are great. You did just wonderfully.
And I'll add to that too. And then I think that, you know, the tricky part here was in the phasing. And so the Planning Commission saw the whole development, the HDHO as a whole, and the master plan, and you approve the entirety of it. And then developers are allowed to phase their developments pretty much however they want to, as long as each phase gets approved. But, you know, each phase doesn't necessarily go back through the whole process because the overall, you know, the HDHO is already applied and the master plan guides the development. So, you know, I think that a lot of the confusion came from what parts of that master plan were happening when, and what a lot of developers don't necessarily account for is the fact that, you know, that overall approval doesn't necessarily guarantee that every phase will then be built. So the county is trying to prevent something happening where, you know, phase 1 gets built and then something happens, the whole project falls apart, and phase 1, you know, left us with some loose ends or threads hanging or, you know, drainage that doesn't work or whatever it is. So, you know, we've been working really hard with our engineer and attorney to make sure that, you know, every phase that gets built along the way could stand alone just in case it needs to.
Wonderful. Thank you for that clarification. And for all the hard work that planning staff does behind the scenes, because I know you carry boulders. So thank you all. Now, really quick, I just want to insert that the original intent, and Garish, I believe this was your request, so correct me if I'm wrong, but on the county council action items was to, for exactly this, to say, you know, if this is a project that we have sent forward a recommendation on or has come before us, just to stay abreast of how that's moving through the council so that if anything does get kicked back to us, we have context. And then we also have the county council update. And I'm thinking it might make sense to just kind of move the county council action items down to the county council update anyway. But were there any other questions from commission of things that are pending that we were hoping to hear updates on from the council? On the action item side, this is not related to the overall update. Okay.
I think the only thing that I'll say actually, which is more of a general update for everybody, is just that I don't know if you're all aware, but the county attorney's office has instituted a 4-week legal review on all project files, all land use decisions going before the council. And this has really changed our kind of process timeline quite a bit. So you will probably notice that there are quite a few projects that seem to not have been scheduled for council meetings. And that's the reason. So they've asked us to provide, complete files with everything done. And then there's a 4-week legal review period, and then we'll be able to notice for public hearings and things like that. So in case you're curious about the slowdown, that's where that is coming from. And that's the current process. It's iterative. It's going to be, in progress, and it is due to COVID and budget related staffing issues.
And that's 4 weeks before it goes to the county council or before it comes to the planning commission?
That's before county council at the moment. So we're working out our legal questions with Christina ahead of planning commission, but it is a 4-week legal review before county council meeting right now.
So the gap between it, something coming before us and coming before the county council is going to be longer than it was in the past.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, it's pretty much impossible for a project right now to go straight from planning commission to county council.
All right. Jalen, do you want to give the county council update now? And that way we can just kind of squeeze those two together and.
Yes, I would love to do that. So first of all, I'll give a COVID-19 update for cases in Grand County. 2.5 weeks ago, when I did an update to my email list of constituents, we had 12 cases. We now have 26 cases in Grand County. And I haven't checked on I think 8 of them are active. The rest are recovered, but that's, pretty quick doubling time. County Council did pass the face mask requirement in public spaces where it's not possible to consistently maintain the 6 feet social distance. Public spaces indoor and out. The Moab Area Watershed Partnership is meeting this Wednesday, 1 p.m. Spanish Trail Arena or by phone and Google Meets. I mention that because Mark Stilson is giving a presentation on the 3rd and final Spanish Valley groundwater monitoring. He will begin at approximately 2:30 and his presentation scheduled go for an hour. And I can forward you to that link if any of you are interested. And I'll also give you the phone number, so just let me know. Electronics recycling is now every Saturday from 8 to 10. The household hazardous waste recycling has been postponed until November 7th. And then finally, I will tell you a little bit about what's going on with 7 County Infrastructure Coalition, just because it involves some land use things. They have submitted a $7.5 million application to the Community Impact Board for a molten salt lab. And they've also completed their application to the Bureau of Land Management for the Book Cliffs, what's infamously called the Books Cliff Highway. And so the BLM is now beginning the pre-NEPA surveys. And that's all I have. Tried to make it brief. And I did want to say I'm thoroughly impressed with all of the applicants for the vacant commission seat. And I too think any of them would have done a great job. So we will look forward to that recommendation at the county council next week.
Wonderful.
Hey, I do have one other thing. I'm going to bring this up at council meeting as part of future considerations. And I don't know if it's feasible at all, but I was in conjunction with the applicants for the vacant seat. I was thinking about the northern end of San Juan County, where, as you all know, we have several hundred at least residents. that feel like they're a part of our community and they contribute a ton to our community. I'm just wondering if when we ask for board members, that could possibly be included, like the school district boundaries might make more sense so that those people in that end of the county actually have representation. Might not be feasible, but I am going to bring it up, and I thought I'd just mention it briefly here.
You know, it is interesting looking at our national model that there are regions that have a voice but not a vote for various reasons. And certainly development, you know, it's a fine line, but I agree that there are probably many citizens of northern San Juan County that considers themselves more closely tied to Grand County and its services and its character, or just sort of the general unit of being a county versus some of the communities farther to the south of them in San Juan County. I'd be really curious if you do raise that, what the council's appetite is for even like doing some divergent thinking on that. I also think it would be wonderful to get more regular updates about the development plans happening in San Juan County. And so, you know, we have this gift of being remote as much as it offers some frustrations to also make it easier for intra-county communication to happen. I am trying my best to stay on top of the development planning that's happening there. And I just haven't been able to always make it a priority. And I would love an update if we have a contact in the San Juan County planning staff, if they would be willing to come and speak to us on some of the progress there. And I don't know if that's something that maybe we could do as a planning commission county council. So we ask them just to present once, or if you all have that line already, but that's maybe another thing to bring up.
Another thing worth thinking about with planning in northern San Juan County, I think there is a provision in state code for regions within a county to establish their own planning commissions, independent of the county-wide one. And I know the people in South Spanish Valley have been talking about doing that. If that were to happen, then it might make sense. You know, then we would have like 3 different jurisdictions in Spanish Valley: Moab City, Grand County, you know, far northern San Juan County. It might make sense to have some informal umbrella organization where at least, you know, all those decision makers could talk together and try to harmonize the planning and zoning to the extent possible.
Indeed.
That's kind of a longer term goal. And then a second related problem, there are some big decisions coming up in northern San Juan County. And I think the biggest one right now is Sitla, which owns a huge amount of land there, is wanting to get invested on their entire, like, I don't know what it is, 15,000 people, you know, it's some very large development that they have in mind. Of course, they're not proposing to build it all at once. But the way P&Z works in San Juan County right now is they might get vested for that entire thing just in one preliminary vote. And so that's something that it came before the San Juan County Commission a few weeks ago and it didn't pass, but there, you know, it might come up again. And I know this might be delicate, but if you think about it, you know, 90% of Grand County, 90% of our population lives within a few miles of South Spanish Valley, and 90% of San Juan County's population lives more than 30 miles away from there. And so it's, in some sense, it has a much bigger effect on us than it does on, you know, the decision makers in Monticello. So I think that Grand County should not be bashful about offering our opinion on these things. You know, it would be like, you know, imagine that Blanding, you know, part of the city limits Blanding were like right by Monticello. You know, I think Monticello would, you know, not want to encourage them, you know, putting all their uses they don't, I don't know, maybe it's a bad analogy. So.
All right, well, I'm eager to see how those conversations at the Grand County level and at the inter-county level continue. So thank you, Jalen. Any other updates from the County Council or any other questions for Jalen before we move forward? All right, So we've got two more things, recent building permit review and future considerations. So staff, Mila, are you still, oh, there you are.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah, so recent building permits, we don't have much except for a few garages and then some single family residences. And you'll notice that some of these are in the new subdivisions, but otherwise nothing really to report there.
And I only want to say that I found it very helpful. We actually do that in Castle Valley, which isn't such a big chore. But for many of the reasons I think people asked for doing this, it tells us, well, what's that building over there and what's happening here. So I think it's very helpful.
Great. Yeah, and it's actually not that hard for us to put this list together either. So we're happy to include it.
Thank you. And that kind of brings us to future considerations. And I know a few things came up, like including the timeline for the small area plan in the packet for the same reason. I mean, just small fry, I think consolidating in our packet, the county council update with the action items. Let's just keep those two together. I do want to come back to the Roberts Rules conversation that came up earlier, but I'll hold on that to see if there's any other future considerations anyone wants to discuss.
Oh yeah, I just had a packet. I was wondering if in the packet for the agenda items, if staff could make sure that the address for the property is up there for the Desert Vista. Because that's the first thing I do when I'm reviewing it is I pull it up on Google Maps, and I had a heck of a time locating that property. Finally, I just scrolled through the whole document and I had to find the address in like the acknowledgement, you know, certificate thing for like the public hearing notice. So I was like, yeah. So if that's possible to just cut and paste the address for each of the concerned properties. And I know that was another issue. It came up on a property a couple meetings back where it wasn't, the address wouldn't work. You couldn't pull it up. You couldn't view it in Google Maps. So it was like the wrong address or something.
Well, some of the Grand County has kind of an addressing problem in some places. Some of the addresses are actually just not really correct or not really settled. So we're actually trying to move a little bit more towards parcel numbers. We can do both for sure in the packet. I'm sorry, I must have just missed that Desert Mesa not having an address. That's silly, but yeah, I think in the future we're trying to move forward with more along the lines of parcel numbers. Because those are correct. And when you use the parcel map, they show up exactly right. Sometimes if you use one of the addresses on some of our parcel maps, they actually plop you down in the middle of the street. And then you have to kind of click around and figure out, you know, which property that is too. So we'll try to make sure that we've got at least both of those up there. But thank you for that. I'm sorry we missed that in the Desert Mesa one.
Oh, no, that's okay. Yeah, that parcel is great. And I use the parcel as well, but sometimes I can get a better, if I use Google Maps, I can just move around a lot easier during the meeting and look at stuff. So yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Kevin, did you have a comment?
I was just going to second Rachel's suggestion, but she did it herself. So.
All right. So before we move on to the Roberts Rules piece, related to the small area planning, we had talked about trying to do an in-person meeting. And of course, there is lots of ambiguity about what the next couple months or month or couple weeks looks like here. I would love staff's opinion on this, of whether we think that is necessary personally, so we're not scrambling at the end, and so we're setting clear expectations. I am of the mind that we plan to do it remotely. Should we find ourselves in a position to do it in person, you know, I'd rather make the change towards that than the other way around. But I just wanted to raise it here. I think there is enough concern amongst citizens in the county that I would hate for somebody to feel like they could not participate because of personal choices related to their health or their family's wellness that kept them from attending that kind of event, even if we did do everything in our power to social distance and be outside. So, I mean, I'd love Mila and Jalen, if you have anything to weigh in on that, if you disagree with that approach. But I think since we will be setting expectations and trying to be as transparent about the process as possible, I personally feel like we should weigh towards that direction.
I agree with that for sure. I think there's too much uncertainty right now to plan on anything in person. I think the only thing that I would say is, you know, it may be worth a field trip, even just for planning commissioners and county council. I don't know if, you know, something like that would be helpful, or, you know, we can absolutely just trust everybody to have eyes on the ground on their own. But I do think that, you know, at least some reconnaissance, you know, heading out there and really getting a feel for what's going on is would be great.
If it's both bodies, and we may, if people are more comfortable, and I look to the council and to the commission to tell us what's comfortable for you. You know, we could split it up into smaller groups, but at least if it's a set number of us, we can be more certain. I also, and I don't want to go down this road, but I would hate for there to be any sort of conflict or concern about mask wearing if we were in an open space, and for that to take over the conversation. I think it's better just to do it remotely. I agree. Let's try and get some on-site time, even if we do it in smaller pods, and we can figure that out more easily amongst the two bodies as we get closer to that. It's probably worth just having a conversation between maybe, you know, Jalen and Mary and Kevin and myself and staff of just like how we can make sure that a remote town hall is effective. So I think we should probably just have a conversation offline about, you know, how we might make that work well. But yeah. Cool. So I wanted to get out by 7:30. So the last thing I had was the Roberts rules as I was phrasing the, I think it was Kevin's motion. I saw the point of not making the negative motions. Here's my question for staff. And if you're not able to answer this today, because there's been some confusion. I know that county council can, an item can fail in front of the council for lack of a motion. Given that the planning commission as an advisory body is sending referrals one way or another to the council, are options therefore either positive motion or something fails for lack of a motion, which would imply no discussion? Because that doesn't seem like it makes as much sense as far as the advisory capacity of our body. So how should we be considering that as we think about how to be consistent, but also, you know, consistent with our role as well?
Right. So, sorry. Hey guys, get out of here.
If it's something staff wants to think about
something. So that's exactly right. So generally, you know, something would, it's advisable to make a positive motion. So, you know, considering that we are an advice, you know, and I think a few meetings ago, we've started, you know, voting on a favorable motion. And then when that's a no vote, that's, you know, considered to fail. I think that's confusing. You know, the county council does have the liberty of there being no motion and then it fails for lack of a motion. I think that's actually very clear. However, considering that the Planning Commission is an advisory body, I think that it may actually make the most sense for us to continue doing what Kevin was suggesting today, which is sending an unfavorable recommendation. The real the meat of it with Robert's rules is just that that a motion should be positive, so that something actually has to happen. You know, there needs to be like an outcome from the motion. And if we are sending a recommendation, that seems to me to be a positive action, like there is actually something happening. So I think that I would be comfortable with continuing with the sending a positive or sending an unfavorable recommendation. So that's a positive motion. And the, you know, really the intent is that members who are voting understand what they're voting on. And I think the way that we did it a few meetings ago when things started changing to being, you know, failing unfavorable recommendations or failing favorable recommendations, I think that's confusing.
Gotcha. Kevin?
Yeah, thanks, Mila, and thanks for clarifying, because I think some of those were opposite of what I thought you were saying earlier. But yeah, I think if we move to send an unfavorable recommendation, that's definitely a positive motion in the Roberts Rules sense. So there's no problem there. And I think, as Emily points out, and you pointed out, there can, voting against the favorable recommendation, that could be because of lack of a second. It could be because people just felt neutral. That's a very ambiguous thing to do. So I think ideally we either send a positive or negative recommendation each time. So.
This is just a funny quizzical question. If you made a motion to not allow a zone change, that would be positive, right, Mila? It's a positive action.
If you mean from, well, planning commission would just send a
planning commission, yeah, planning commission said, if I said I move that we do not allow the change in zoning, that would be a positive.
Yes, I think so.
I would move that we recommend to the county council that we not allow. I mean,
yeah, right.
Great. So I think that clarifies the confusion from earlier.
A little bit. I think the only thing, we should just be very aware of our wording, because I think, I can imagine a similar situation though, where somebody makes a motion to send an unfavorable recommendation and then that fails, which would then mean that we are sending a favorable recommendation by virtue of the unfavorable motion failing. Right. So it's a little bit confusing.
We should make a second motion to send a favorable recommendation, because again, there could be people who are just totally on the fence and aren't going to vote for either one. So I think the procedure should be, someone makes a motion, it's either for a favorable or an unfavorable recommendation. That motion, if it passes, we're done. If it fails, then we should consider making the opposite motion to send a favorable, or whatever the opposite of the first one was. And if they both fail, then that means, we don't actually have a recommendation that a majority.
I think that sounds very clear. So then either way, we end up with a motion that passes in one direction or the other, and nobody has to figure out the fact that it failed means the opposite or something along those lines.
That's a standard I'm comfortable with. So we will send a motion that passes or a motion that is
nothing,
nothing down the middle, one way or another. I feel comfortable with that. All right, great. Any remaining words? Otherwise, does somebody want to move that we adjourn?
I move that we adjourn.
And seconded by 3 people. Fantastic. I think Kevin got it. All right, everyone. Thanks. Have a great evening.
Goodbye.
Thank you all. Good night.
All right, girls.